"Welcome, my young friend," Norris said with a smile. "Are you perhaps here to purchase slaves again?" "Yes," 13 replied. "But I want the special ones and not the ones sold here." "Oh dear, are you referring to the ones that I will send to the auction house a week from now?" "Yes." Norris rubbed his chin as he looked at the snake that was coiled up around the boy's neck. Seeing that the Domini Mortis had a satisfied look on her face, the slave master couldn't help but ask the boy a question. "Can you tell me why you want to purchase those special slaves?" Norris inquired. "But before that, let's go inside. This is not a good place to discuss these matters." The middle-aged man made a gesture for 13 to follow him to his office in order to have a proper talk. 13 nodded and followed behind him because he also didn't want to discuss these things in the open. When the two were properly seated, 13 told Norris about his encounter with the purple-furred honey badger, which made the slave master almost choke on the tea he was drinking. "Why, you saw that monster and survived?" Norris looked at the 7-year-old with a dumbfounded look on his face. By the gods, not many can survive an encounter with the purple-furred honey badger and live to tell their tale. As a slave trader, he had dealt with many people, so he could easily tell if someone was lying or not. A single glance was enough to tell him that the boy was telling the truth, which made him understand why 13 suddenly visited him. "Well, even with the monsters I have, I don't think there is one among them who can fight that monster head-on," Norris stated. "I know," 13 replied. "But there are 2 monsters that I would like to purchase from you." "Even if I suffer losses?" Norris asked with a devilish smile on his face. "I don't want you to suffer losses," 13 replied. "So, I am willing to buy them higher than the market price." Norris pondered a bit before leaning back on his chair. "Tell me what the 2 monsters are first. If they are not that high in demand, I will consider your request." 13 nodded. "I want the Poco and the Chad skunk." "Interesting choices." Norris narrowed his eyes. "I can understand why you need the Chad skunk, but the Poco? That's just one annoying bird." A moment later, a businessman smile appeared on Norris' face after making up his mind. "Since you are a friend, I don't mind selling you the Poco for 5,000 silver coins," Norris stated. "It's not a monster you can find in these parts, so I believed that the barbarians would buy it as a pet because of its uniqueness. I know that it is very expensive, but I believe that some barbarians would be willing to spend that much for it." The Poco was a colorful bird that resembled a parrot. It specialized in mimicking sounds, including the voices of people. It was also very smart and, just like Norris had stated, it was a monster that wasn't native to this part of the world. The slave master was only able to capture it by pure coincidence because it was injured when he found it, so it didn't take long for him to carve the slave tattoo on its head. Truth be told, the Poco was similar to the fluffy white cat that he had given his sister, Remy, as a house pet. The only difference was that the Poco that Norris captured was actually a rank 3 monster. However, although it was a rank 3 monster, the only thing it was good at was flying away at great speeds, as well as mimicking sounds and voices. It served no other purpose aside from that. In the human kingdoms, there were a handful of people who used the Poco as messenger birds, who relayed exactly what their masters wanted to say to the people they wanted to pass the message to. They could be useful once they were trained. But that was the problem. Taming these birds was very hard because they were a rowdy bunch. They were similar to the angry Birbs of a certain red-headed half-elf who would hurl profanities at people with every chance that they got. "How about the Chad skunk?" 13 inquired. "I am willing to buy it as well." Norris shook his head. "Unfortunately, the Chad skunk is a hot commodity. I am willing to sell you the Poco, but for the Chad skunk, you have to bid on it in the auction." 13 frowned, but in the end he nodded his head in understanding. "Very well, I will bid on it during the auction," 13 stated. "But please wait here while I bring the Poco to you." "Okay." Several minutes later, the slave master returned holding a bird cage in his hand. Inside of it was a colorful bird with a muzzle attached to its beak. This was to prevent the Poco from saying anything, which made the 7-year-old smile faintly. His previous host had a Poco pet, and he knew full well how obnoxious these birds could be. This was why only a select few treated them as pets, because they could cause their owners to have heart attacks, strokes, and aneurysms due to how foul-mouthed they were. Pokopokos in captivity didn't live long lives. Due to their nature, their masters would often kill them in a fit of anger because of how annoying they could be. They weren't strong monsters to begin with, and only fell into the nuisance monster category. Just like most monsters, Pokopokos ranked up as well. But their ranks couldn't go past rank 4. The only thing that changed whenever they ranked up was their flight speed, which could reach up to 100 miles per hour. Their voices could also be heard from farther away as their rank rose higher. At rank 1, their voices could be heard from 200 meters. At rank 2, 400 meters. At rank 3, 600 meters. At rank 4, you could hear it from a kilometer away. "Let's bind this bird first," Norris said. "I don't know how smart this bastard is, but it knows a lot of words. It must have visited a lot of human cities before I found it." After Norris finished his preparation, he asked 13 to drop a blood on the bird's forehead so that the slave tattoo would activate. Truth be told, the Pokopoko was one of the few monsters that had a strong resistance against the slave tattoo. In short, these birds could choose not to obey an order, and they would not suffer from the backlash of the tattoo on their foreheads. However, there was one thing that they couldn't do, and that was to escape from their master, whom they were bound to. In short, once the Pokopoko was contracted to someone, they would have to stay with the person for years. This was also one of the reasons why they were one of the monsters with the highest death rates in captivity, because they would almost always insult their masters and not follow any of their orders. When the ceremony ended, the Pokopoko looked at its new master in disdain. Norris, on the other hand, smirked after 13 finished paying up. "I would like to remind you before you leave that there is no refund for this transaction," Norris stated. "If this bird gets on your nerves, just chop off its head and roast it. Their meat is actually a delicacy." "I know," 13 replied. "But I'm sure that this bird and I will get along just fine." If the Pokopoko had fingers, it might have already given its new master the middle finger. This was evident to the look of disdain that it was giving the boy. Even in the face of death, it refused to yield. This was why it was one of the hardest, if not the hardest, monsters to tame in Solterra. But this wasn't a problem for 13. After all, he already knew how to tame this monster, who would become a valuable ally once it truly recognized the 7-year-old as its master. "Thank you for the business, and don't hesitate to visit me again if you need more slaves," the slave master stated. "Although I can't sell you the ones meant for auction, everything else on display is fair game." "Then in that case, I will accept your offer," 13 replied. The boy then walked towards the slaves that were on display and picked up the ones that caught his attention. When 13 returned to the warehouse, he brought with him 1 Pokopoko, 2 ogres, and 10 trolls. The 2 ogres were both rank 3 monsters, while the 10 trolls were all rank 2. He made sure to personally handpick them from the rest, which made Norris wonder how the boy's master, Jubii, was able to accumulate such wealth. This lineup was equivalent to a middle-sized hunting party, which typically ranged from 12 up to 30 individuals. Most of the monsters in the Warzer Plains came in herd or in groups of 3 and 4, so 13 deemed that this setup would be the most ideal. "All of you behave okay?" 13 looked at the slaves that were standing in front of him. "You are not allowed to harm anyone from this warehouse in any way whatsoever. All of you will only take orders from me. If any of the people here give you orders, report it to me the next time you guys see me." The trolls and ogres eyed him, but none of them said anything. 13 didn't mind their reaction and proceeded to call the one whom he would appoint as the temporary leader of the group. "Come forward, T1, 13 ordered. Unlike Christopher, who bonded with his slaves, the 7-year-old didn't want to form any attachment to his subordinates because he understood that losses would be inevitable. Of course, this didn't mean that he would purposefully send his slaves to their deaths. As a system, he would make sure that all of them survived as long as it could be helped, allowing them to become his core unit as he traveled within the Sumatran kingdom. The naming scheme he came up with was straight to the point. He named the 10 trolls T1 up to T10. The 2 ogres, on the other hand, were named O1 and O2. The troll whom he had called out stepped forward and looked at the boy in front of him with a glare. 13 didn't mind the looks of hatred aimed in his direction because he had already seen more than enough of them to last him several lifetimes. You will become the temporary leader of this group, 13 ordered. All of you will listen to T1's orders. So my first order is this: start cooking and let everyone eat their fill. After that, rest up properly and don't bother the human children resting in this place. That is all. The troll grunted in acknowledgement of 13's orders. With the help of Norris, the boy had bought several slabs of monster meat. The amount he bought was enough to feed his slaves for a week. He deliberately picked the trolls who knew how to roast food, so he no longer needed to bother the other teenagers to cook for them. After giving out his orders, he went straight to his room, carrying the cage of the Poco. The bird was only a foot tall, and it looked dumb on the surface. But 13 knew more than anyone how intelligent these birds were. Even now, he could tell that the bird was appraising his every move. His previous host once said that Pocos might actually be smarter than humans. They simply acted stupid to ensure that their race wouldn't be hunted down until the last bird due to human greed. This was also why those who learned how to tame Pocos kept this secret. They knew that this bird, who seemed to only know how to *T talk and annoy people, could be very useful if used in the right situations. Here comes the annoying part, 13 thought as he placed the cage of the Poco on the table before opening it. At times like this, I wish I could cut off my sense of hearing. The Poco jumped out of the cage and stood on the table, looking at the boy with the same disdainful look on his face. 13 stared at the dumb-looking bird for a full minute before removing the muzzle that covered its beak. Taming a Poco wasn't that hard. The problem was that in order to get their acknowledgement, their masters must do one thing, and that was murder. Someone help. Code Brown. I repeat, Code Brown. 13 sat on the chair with his arms crossed over his chest. His gaze never left the bird, who had started to shout a bunch of nonsense as soon as the muzzle was taken off from its beak. The Poco jumped around the table and shouted as if trying to wake up the dead. Oh no! It's too big! It's not going to fit! What are you doing, step bro? You brute! This is my first time. Itai. That's what she says. The Poco changed its voice from a grown man to a woman. From a boy to a girl. Unlike a parrot that could only use its own voice, the Poco was very good at imitating the voice of others nearly to perfection. You want my treasure? You can have it. I left everything I gathered together in one place. Now you just have to find it. Would you let me see your panties? I am going to be the pirate king. 13's gaze remained locked on the bird, who was busy clowning around, performing its one-sided parody. You can't change the world with pretty words alone. If strength is justice, then is powerlessness a crime? When will the war end? When someone wins. All hail Britannia. After nearly an hour of making a ruckus, the Poco finally stopped shouting and gave 13 a sidelong glance. The boy was still looking at the dumb-looking bird, which had a cheeky look in its eyes. Are you done? 13 asked after a full minute passed with the bird not saying anything. The Poco hopped on top of the table and directly stopped in front of the boy, whose gaze remained as calm as the surface of the lake. Are you stupid? The Poco asked. Yes, 13 replied. I don't like stupid people, the Poco said. So I'll ask you again. Are you stupid? I'm not stupid. I don't like stupid people. But I also don't like them. Heh. Ho. Kikik. Stop imitating me. The Poco demanded. The corner of 13's lips curled up into a smile. Now that the Poco was paying proper attention to him, it was finally time to get its acknowledgement. What was the 7th phrase I said when I started talking? The Poco asked. What are you doing, step bro? 13 replied. What is the thing that I don't like the most? The Poco inquired. Stupid people, 13 answered. When will the war end? The Poco asked. When someone wins, 13 replied. The Poco continued to ask 13 questions, and all of these questions were all about the things that it had said over the past hour. 13 answered all of them correctly, without making a single mistake. Finally, half an hour later, the Poco stopped talking. The dumb look on its face disappeared, replaced by a wizened gaze, which made the boy finally sigh in relief in his heart. Getting the acknowledgement of a Poco wasn't hard. However, you needed to endure its ramblings until it was satisfied. If the person left the room, shouted at it, or even heard it even once, the Poco would deem that person unworthy of its allegiance. So when the bird finally quieted down, 13 knew that he was halfway there in getting its acknowledgement. Finally, it's over, 13 thought. The true negotiation starts now. The Poco sighed before looking at the jug of water on the table. Can I have some water? The Poco asked. I'm parched from all of that talking. Of course, 13 replied. The boy took a wooden bowl from the cupboard and poured some water into it, allowing the Poco to drink. After sating its thirst, the bird said its thanks and proceeded to look at the boy with a solemn look on his face. How did you know? The Poco asked. It was just a simple question, and yet, 13 knew that he must answer it truthfully because this was something very important to the Pocos. I watched a very dear friend of mine do the same thing, and they were able to gain the acknowledgement of your kind, 13 answered truthfully. When did this happen? A little more than 300 years ago. Oh, but you look extremely young. How did you watch your very dear friend do it if it happened a little more than 300 years ago? The Poco asked. Its eyes were narrowed and paying close attention to the boy's reply. It didn't outright say that 13 was lying because the bird could also tell if someone was lying to it. Although the boy's answer seemed impossible, the Poco didn't detect any lies in his words. It's complicated, 13 replied. It's fine. I like complicated things. Fine. 13 explained that he was a system that once accompanied his host on his journey in Solterra. The Poco didn't interrupt and quietly listened to 13's story with an unreadable look on its face. When the boy finished his tale, the Poco nodded its head in understanding. Well, it is indeed complicated as you said, the Poco admitted. I still don't understand half of it, but I can tell that you didn't say a single lie. Well then, what do you want from me? Serve me faithfully for 3 years, 13 stated. In order to show my sincerity, I will also remove the slave tattoo from your forehead. The slave tattoo only looked like a simple black dot on a slave's forehead if looked at from a distance. However, there were many intricate lines embedded in it, which strengthened the power of the beast contract. You are a wanderer, are you not? The Poco asked. Also, that snake around your neck is highly venomous, and yet you allow it to coil around your neck as if it's an accessory. I know that it's your slave, but I don't sense any malice or hostility from its eyes directed toward you. This can only mean one thing. It likes you very much, and you trust it enough to allow it to coil around your neck like some kind of choker. With that, I can confer that it's different from those trolls and ogres you bought earlier. 13 nodded. I am a wanderer, and Tiona is indeed different from the other slaves that I bought earlier. Tiona, the Poco mused. Depending on the languages of this world, it can either mean fairy queen or a gift from God. A good name indeed. The Poco closed its eyes as if pondering for a moment. A few minutes later, it nodded its head as if it had finally made a decision. Very well, 3 years it is, the Poco stated. I will serve you faithfully for 3 years on 2 conditions. 13 nodded. The Poco that his host had managed to tame also asked for 2 conditions from him 300 years ago. The first condition is to take the method of befriending us to your grave, the Poco stated. Like I told you earlier, my race and I don't like stupid people. It is only the smart and eccentric ones who actually pay close attention to what we have to say. I will do as you say, 13 replied. The second condition, the Poco stated. If there ever comes a time that you see my race in need of help, you will help them to the best of your ability. Okay. 13 nodded. I promise. A promise you should keep, for we are a race blessed by the deities of air, the Poco said. They hear and see everything. No lies, no truths, and no secrets can escape their senses. They will find out if you didn't keep your word. They will also inform our entire race about you, so be warned. We may not be strong as individuals, but together we can set many things in motion. The Poco then closed its eyes and presented its forehead to 13, allowing him to remove the slave tattoo from its head. Now that he had agreed to the Poco's conditions, there was no need for the seal that bound it to him. The slave tattoo was also useless on Pocos since they had the ability to ignore their master's orders. The only thing the slave tattoo could do was prevent the bird from flying away and escaping from its master. "I set you free," 13 said as he tapped the slave tattoo on the bird's forehead, making it disappear completely. A sigh escaped the Poco's beak as if a weight had been lifted off its body. "Now that you've shown your sincerity, allow me to show my sincerity as well," the Poco stated. "I will allow you to bestow upon me a name. This will be the name that I shall use for the 3 years that we would be together." 13 already had a name prepared for the Poco the moment he received its acknowledgement. Unlike the trolls and ogres whom he gave numbered names, he prepared a special name for the Poco, who would become one of his most loyal supporters over the next 3 years of his life. "Vesego," 13 said. "From this day onward, your name will be Vesego." Right after coming to an agreement with Vesego, 13 left the warehouse and headed to the plaza. But he didn't leave alone. Coiled around his neck was Tiona, and sitting on his left shoulder was Vesego, looking like a dumb bird that was forced to smell the smelliest fart for an entire hour. After reaching the plaza, the 7-year-old headed toward the smithing district, where the best blacksmiths of Groner City gathered. He entered each of the shops that he saw and inspected their wares, checking the quality and craftsmanship of the weapons and armor that were displayed for sale. After nearly 3 hours of window shopping, he finally found a smithy that met the bare minimum of the quality and standard that he was looking for. "My master sent me to have a custom-made order," 13 said. "Can you handle bulk orders?" The clerk who was manning the shop shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, boy," the barbarian replied. "We have too many work orders as of late, and we don't have time to accept any commissions right now." "Can I ask what you guys are working on right now?" 13 inquired. "We just need a few weapons for our hunting party." "I'm sorry, but we are also doing a bulk order of swords and axes right now," the clerk said. "In fact, not only us but almost all the blacksmiths are commissioned to do the same." 13 thanked the clerk before leaving the smithy. He had an idea as to why nearly all the blacksmiths were making weapons in bulk. But until he confirmed his suspicions, he didn't dare make any decision. It was no secret that the Tigerkins and the barbarians were gearing up for a war. He just didn't know when this event would actually come to pass. "Vesego, I have an errand for you," 13 said after they reached an unpopulated area. Vesego tilted its head to the side like the dumb bird that it was. After he finished giving the Poco an order, the bird nodded in understanding. "You have 4 days," 13 said. "Make sure not to get eaten by some random monster while completing your mission." Vesego tilted its head to the side before flapping its wings to fly. It didn't have any intention of showing its other side in public, even if it thought that there was no one watching its location. The boy looked at the bird until it disappeared from his vision before returning to the smithy district. "You know what they say," 13 muttered. "If you want things done right, you must do it yourself." Tiona nodded her head in agreement with her master's words. She didn't know what 13 was thinking, but she decided to just nod to show her support to him. It was already very late in the night by the time 13 returned to the warehouse. He had rented 2 wagons and splurged a lot to buy iron, or a halcyon, as well as some monster parts that 13 planned to use to arm his hunting party. The raw materials already cost him 20,000 silver coins. Yet the actual hammer which would be used for smithing was priced at 50,000 silver coins. "This adamantine hammer sure is expensive," 13 thought as he glanced at the hammer that was lying in the wagon behind him. He had tried to bargain with the blacksmith whom he purchased it from, but the man was as stubborn as a dwarf, so he had no choice but to buy it at a fixed price. 13's wealth was over 150,000 silver coins in the past. But after buying slaves, raw metals, monster parts, and smithing hammer, plus paying for the rent of the warehouse, his money dropped to 62,000 silver coins. It was still considered a lot of money, but he doubted that it would be enough to bid for the 5-leaf cover, which he needed to pass his second trial. "One step at a time," 13 muttered. "Just focus on what is in front of you right now, 13. If he wanted to survive in Solterra, he had to use all the resources available to him. After storing the wagons inside the warehouse, he ate a light dinner and slept peacefully. The next day, "Make sure that you do it right, 01, 13 ordered. "If you make a mistake, you're not going to have lunch." The ogre groaned as it held the adamantine hammer in its right hand and an orichalcum chisel in its left. It then worked to engrave the symbol that 13 had drawn on the anvil carefully. 13 didn't ask for anything complicated. All the ogre needed to do was to follow the lines of the drawing and lightly hit the chisel twice before moving to the next spot. The ogre was basically just playing connect the dots, which 13 had made for it, but with a chisel and a hammer. Simply put, even if the ogre was all brawn and no brain, it would still be able to do what 13 had asked it to. The boy had asked the trolls to prevent anyone from coming to his workshop because he would start to use rune magic to imbue the anvil and forge with a special ability that would allow him to increase the chances of succeeding in his craft. He had also bought dozens of beast cores for this task, not even batting an eye when he made his purchase. It took 13 half a day to finish his preparations in his workshop. Fortunately, he didn't encounter any hiccups. To celebrate, he made sure to feed his subordinates with a lot of meat, which they liked very much. Christopher finally came out of his room in the afternoon to look for his young master. Seeing his reddened eyes and the dark circles under them, he knew that the boy had his first taste of loss in Solterra. "Young master, I'm sorry and thank you," Christopher said as he knelt on the floor. "If you didn't stop me in time, I might have summoned Brutus and Bruno, endangering all of us in the process." "You have nothing to be sorry about," 13 replied. "None of us could have expected that we would encounter that kind of monster on our first expedition. It was simply outside of our control." Christopher nodded, but 13 was certain that he was still hurting inside. Fortunately, he hadn't spent a long time with those ogres yet, 13 thought. If his attachment to them was already too deep when the incident happened, he might have suffered a crippling heartbreak, making him unable to function for more than a week. After making Christopher stand up, the 7-year-old took the chubby boy to his workshop. "You bought so many slaves, master," Christopher stuttered after seeing the 10 trolls and 2 ogres who were currently lifting heavy crates filled to the brim with raw metals and monster parts. "I decided to increase our manpower to ensure our survival in the Warzer Plains," 13 stated. "But I was also waiting for you, Christopher." "Waiting for me?" "Yes. I will need your help in order to create the best hunting party in the Sumatran kingdom." Christopher's face became serious. "What kind of help do you need, young master?" "As long as I can do it, I will do everything in my power to help." "Good," 13 said as he lightly patted the chubby boy's waist. "I knew that I could count on you." What Christopher didn't know was that the help 13 needed wasn't anything serious. It was simply manual labor. However, it was a kind of manual labor that would not only train Christopher to become stronger but would also train Brutus and Bruno to perform other tasks aside from fighting the Warzer Plains monsters, which they would inevitably face after the auction in Groner City was over. "It's fine, Bruno," 13 said to the ogre that was feeling down because he had turned the iron ore into scrap metal. "You'll get used to it soon." Hammering sounds resounded inside the boys' workshop as Christopher and Brutus also pounded on iron ore with the hammers they held in their hands. Why were they doing that? 13 was teaching them how to do smithing. Of course, he didn't expect the 3 of them to be proficient in a very short period of time. Even his father, Gerald, took years before he became a decent crafter. Since that was the case, why was 13 telling them to do smithing? The answer was simple. He didn't need to create quality goods. He just needs to mass-produce usable items for their hunting party, like arrows for bows and bolts for crossbows. These things were easier to do because all he needed to do was create molds for them to be mass-produced. Brutus had shown exceptional skills in adapting to things, which might have contributed to him having the evolver ability. He was a unique troll to begin with, and seemed to be a prodigy within his race. Because of this, he was able to follow 13's orders without fail, and was starting to become fairly decent in forming molds for the items they needed to craft. What the boy didn't know was that, when he was still alive, Brutus was already fascinated with making his own tools and weapons. He had tried to carve weapons from monster bones in the past, and although he failed a lot, he still managed to make a somewhat decent weapon. Unfortunately, that weapon of his broke when he went out hunting in the desert. Because of this, he used the wooden club he had before venturing out again. That was the last journey he made because he died when he arrived at the oasis to drink some water. Fortunately, he was Christopher's first brute monster, allowing him to gain the evolver skill and further grow into a more powerful troll. "Master, must I really do this?" Christopher asked as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Brutus and Bruno can handle this on their own. Why must I also do smithing?" "Because you didn't train that much in the Leventis family," 13 replied. "The most you did was a bit of survival training. You lack strength and stamina. Smithing is a good way for you to build up your muscles. Now stop talking and start pounding." Christopher sighed but did as he was told. The chubby boy was tasked with pounding an iron ore until it took shape. Norris had asked his connection to build a simple forge for 13, and the latter paid for it for 2,000 silver coins. He also purchased 1,000 silver's worth of coals, which would be used to heat up the forge, so they could start smelting metal. 13 also bought ready-made smithing tongs and pliers to complete the process. Bruno wielded the adamantine hammer, while Brutus and Christopher wielded steel hammers. But they didn't just randomly swing their hammers as they did their forging. 13 was teaching them the proper forms of blacksmithing, paving the way to building up their foundations in learning the divine technique, hammer for all seasons. This was the same technique that Gerald possessed, but instead of spending decades to perfect the technique, it only took him a few months to become proficient in it. The 7-year-old still needed to talk to the Laplace demon and the One, if it was possible for them to allow him to impart his divine techniques to other people aside from his family. Although it was a long shot, he planned to use this incident as a way to make them compromise. Since that was the case, Christopher, Brutus, and Bruno would learn the martial technique faster once they mastered the basics and built a good foundation for it. Also, he was thinking about the future. Unlike Brutus, who had the evolver skill, Bruno had lost his ability to rank up after he had become an avatar. 13 teaching him how to do smithing was him being considerate of the ogre, and preventing him from feeling useless when Christopher surpassed his rank. Although it might be cruel, that was the fate of avatars. Once they were no longer useful, they would either be sold or traded to other people, because their owners left them behind. At least, if Bruno mastered the hammer for all seasons up to the intermediate rank, he would still be able to become useful as a monster smith. If the ogre focused all of his attention in learning blacksmithing, then it was not impossible for him to become a divine blacksmith, capable of crafting mythical, legendary, and divine-ranked equipment in the future. Judging by Christopher's character, I'm sure that he will not throw Bruno away, 13 thought as he watched the chubby boy pound the chunk of metal into random shapes as his training. But he is still young. His mentality can change once he witnesses the cruelty of the world. If Christopher didn't really need Bruno anymore, then 13 would ask him to give the ogre to his father. Since he planned to have Gerald focus on crafting, having an ogre as an assistant would help him tremendously. An ogre smith? Bruno will probably be the first of his kind in Solterra to get such a profession, 13 thought as he looked at the ogre, who had a determined look on his face as he continued to swing the adamantine hammer over and over again. There were only 5 days remaining before the auction started. 13 had already made peace with the fact that there was a possibility that he wouldn't have enough funds to bid for the 5-leaf clover. His priority was survival, so he planned to use his funds to bid for the Chad skunk, which Norris would send to the auction house. Currently, he only had 59,000 silver coins. He could increase it in a short amount of time if he visited the dueling arena and the gambling den. However, he was currently banned from doing so. Of course, he could send one of the slaves that Rihanna had freed to bid for him, but he didn't want to break Raldo's trust. The dueling arena and the gambling den was the business of the city lord. Since Raldo was working with such an individual, it would be bad to make an enemy of him. Besides, he had a feeling that they would be staying in Groner City for a period of time, so antagonizing the city lord was not something they could afford to do at this moment in time. Brutus, I think you have already mastered the basics, 13 commented as he observed the troll's meticulous work. Now, I will teach you how to create an arrowhead mold. But after you perfect it, you will make more of them on your own, okay? Brutus nodded and watched as 13 carved an arrowhead from a piece of wood. After that, the 7-year-old placed it in a molding flask and filled it up with casting sand. Brutus continued to watch as 13 compressed the sand on top of the arrowhead. When the boy was done, he flipped it over and removed the sand that was covering the arrowhead. He took another casting flask and placed it on top of the first one. Just like he did earlier, he filled it up with casting sand. When he was done, he flipped it over to remove the wooden carving, which had served its purpose. Now, we just need to make a hole here. That's where we will pour the metal in, 13 explained as he bored a hole in the center of the cask. Then we expand the hole a bit, forming a funnel, so that the melted metal will not overflow like so. After finishing his model, 13 pressed the 2 casks together and melted some iron in the forge. When he was done, he poured the iron slowly into the hole of the molding flask. Let it cool down a bit, then after that we just need to clean it up using the grinder. Now, we have an arrowhead, 13 explained. Did you understand everything, or do I need to explain it to you again? Brutus hesitated, but he still nodded and pointed at the molding flask. What more? Okay. 13 took out another pair of molding flasks and repeated the process a second time while waiting for the first arrowhead to cool down. After demonstrating the process a second time, he asked Brutus to create the third arrowhead on his own. The troll didn't do it as well as 13 did, but the end result was still passable. Ordinary arrows might be effective for lower-ranking monsters. But when dealing with stronger monsters like the purple-furred honey badger, they would need weapons that were sharp enough to pierce through its body. Fortunately, making molds for arrowheads was easy. All they needed to do was melt the metal they needed and pour it into the molding flask, allowing them to mass-produce as many arrows as they wanted. Seeing that Brutus could handle the rest on his own, the boy went to check on Bruno's progress. Good job, Bruno. You're doing well, 13 praised the ogre as he looked at the sorry excuse for a sword, which looked like a bunch of metal sheets piled on top of each other. The ogre scratched its head while smiling. Being praised by the 7-year-old made him just as happy as his own master, Christopher, was praising him. 13 knew that it would take a very long time for the ogre to perfect his craft, but he wasn't in a hurry. In the hands of ogres, even a slab of jagged steel was a very lethal weapon. So even Bruno's sorry excuse for a sword was deadlier than the bone club that it was currently using to fight. Perhaps, Bruno knew on an instinctual level that there would come a time when Christopher would no longer have a use for him. He felt this sense of crisis when his master bought ogres that were stronger than him. This was why he planned to give his all into blacksmithing. Even if he was no longer considered strong, he would at least still be useful to his master. 13 watched as the ogre raised his adamantine hammer to continue refining the slab of jagged steel that he finished making. A faint smile could be seen on the 7-year-old's face because he saw the determination in the ogre's eyes. Determination that would pave the way for great things, which would help his master, Christopher, in more ways than one. 2 days later, Rihanna's hunting party returned to the city. The teenagers all looked haggard, but 13 noticed that all members of the hunting party were present. He went to meet up with Rihanna, who was leading the group. Although she looked very exhausted, he could tell that the latter was satisfied with the results of her expedition. "Welcome back," 13 said with his arms crossed over his chest. "Did you have a good hunt?" "Yes," Rihanna replied. "We killed a few monsters, and some gained bronze-grade weapons and armor from them." "That's great to hear." 13 nodded. "You did well, Rihanna." "Thank you." Rihanna smiled. The 3 teenage boys, Rufus, Aaron, and Jean didn't like the way that 13 was treating Rihanna like a subordinate. They had already made this known to Rihanna while they were out hunting, but the young lady only brushed it off and told them that she and Zion were just comrades. However, she didn't deny the fact that she recognized the boy's qualities as a leader and that she didn't mind following his orders. This was what ticked the 3 teenagers off the most because they believed that 13 was just taking advantage of Rihanna's kindness. How about your expedition? Rufus asked as he stood beside Rihanna. Did you get good results? No. 13 shook his head. The 2 ogres on our team died, and we were forced to return to the city before a day was even over. Huh? You act so high and mighty and you even failed to show some results. Aaron, who was quick to find faults in the boy, commented. To think that you made everyone think that you're some kind of big shot just because you are from the Leventis family, Jean stated. It seems that I overestimated you. Rihanna ignored the 3 teenagers who were looking down on the boy in front of them and pressed 13 for answers. Unlike Rufus, Aaron, and Jean, the young lady knew full well what 13 was capable of. After all, he was the one who saved them from the slave traders who had come to bring them to Groner City. If 13 hadn't saved them, she would have been up for sale in the slave market, just like the other wanderers that the orcs and the barbarians had captured. We faced a rank 6 overlord, purple-furred honey badger, 13 said after Rihanna's persistence. It killed the 2 rank 3 ogres like it was merely dealing with newly born chicks. A/N. I will refer to the individual rankings of monsters as common, alpha, overlord, and sovereign from this moment onward. Rihanna, for now, don't go to the Warzer Plains. Christopher and I will explore them after we make our preparations. You and the others should just continue to strengthen yourselves and get better equipment in the Houdini Desert. Okay, Rihanna nodded. But if the Warzer Plains is really that dangerous, just give it up for now and hunt in the Houdini Desert too. Meeting a rank 6 overlord and being able to survive it is already considered a miracle. You did well coming back alive. The young lady even lightly patted 13's head, treating him like a little brother. Don't treat me like a child, 13 said as he blocked Rihanna's patting with his hand. But you are a child, Rihanna grinned. 13 wanted to tell the young lady that he was actually thousands of years old. But knowing that she would think that he was just joking, he decided that it was not worth his while. The 3 boys, who were laughing at 13 in their hearts earlier, suddenly became serious. Originally, they had proposed to Rihanna that they should go to the Warzer Plains to hunt for monsters. However, Rihanna rejected it because 13 already planned to head there to investigate. Because of that, she decided to just hunt in the Houdini Desert so that their 2 hunting parties wouldn't have to compete with each other. After hearing that the boy encountered a rank 6 overlord just hours after leaving the city, all of them knew that if they had really gone to the Warzer Plains as they originally planned, there was a high chance that their group would have encountered it as well. But there was one question that nagged at their minds when they started thinking about it. Would they have managed to survive and return to the city safely with more than half of their numbers remaining? Rufus, Aaron, and Jean didn't know the answer to this question. However, they themselves knew that the chances of them surviving an encounter with a rank 6 overlord were close to 0. Are you preparing for a hunt, or are you preparing for war? Rihanna asked as she looked at the hustle and bustle that was happening on the other side of the warehouse, where 13 and his slaves were staying. The trolls were busy assembling arrows using the arrowheads that Brutus and T1 were making nonstop. Aside from creating molds, they were also constantly melting iron and steel which they'd later pour into the molds to create the arrowheads, which would then be passed to the assemblers. It was tough work, so 13 divided the trolls into 2 teams. One team was assisting Brutus, while the other team was shaving wood to be used as the arrow's body. The trolls that 13 handpicked were already proficient in making arrows. However, the most they could make were very crude arrows. So, the 7-year-old boy taught them the right way of making them. Fortunately, the trolls learned quickly, which was why they were able to create so many arrows in a short period of time. Percival was also forced to join the production, but the latter didn't voice out any complaints. His character had changed a bit after 13 gave him a taste of his killing intent that he had been holding back for thousands of years. If the Tigerkin hadn't been strong-willed and didn't have the makings of a hero, he might have been completely traumatized by the boy's deadly gaze. Of course, he would still glare at his master from time to time, but the glare wasn't as intense as the ones he gave him before. A hunt is also a war, 13 commented. The only difference is that I'm taking this war seriously. Can you give me some of the finished arrows? Rihanna asked. No, 13 replied. I gave you enough freebies already. Use your own slaves to make your own. Stingy. You're already freeloading in my warehouse, and you still dare call me stingy? Should I kick you all out for not paying the rent? Rihanna lightly cleared her throat before bidding 13 goodbye with the excuse of having a strategy meeting with her own hunting party. The boy watched her go, and only when he could no longer see her did he sigh in his heart. Warha. 13 thought as he looked towards the northeast. I just hope that I'm overthinking things. Visago soared across the sky and kept watch on the land under him. 13 had given him 3 missions, and he only had 4 days to finish them. One of his missions was to find the exact location of the purple-furred honey badger, the overlord of the Warzer Plains. The 7-year-old didn't want a repeat of the incident that happened a few days ago when the rank 6 monster managed to get close to them without their notice. They were able to escape the first time with their lives, but they might not be lucky the second time. Because of this, 13 wanted to know the location of the monster at all times, preventing another tragedy from happening. While doing the first mission, Visago was also able to do his second mission, which was to identify all the types of monsters in the plains as well as the surrounding areas. 13 asked the Poco to double-check if there were any Jinn-type monsters who liked to eat humans around. The reason why he wanted to know the locations of these monsters was due to a simple reason. Wanderers were the Jinn's natural enemies. Because of this, Wanderers had a higher chance of getting items from Jinns after they were killed. Christopher's luck wasn't as high as Rihanna's when it came to monster drops. The 7-year-old wanted to overcome that problem by hunting Jinns and collecting their body parts for weapons. Target found, Visago thought when he saw something purple moving on the ground. That something purple was none other than the purple-furred honey badger, who was targeting a group of gray-haired cheetahs that were eyeing a herd of robust bisons. The target of the cheetahs were, of course, the young ones, since the older ones were very tough and harder to deal with. Visago took note of the honey badger's location before flying away. He still needed to visit the cities of the Tigerkins to see whether they were also preparing for a large-scale battle with the barbarians. If the two sides were really going to fight, then 13 would choose a different route for their hunting trip in order to prevent getting accidentally sandwiched between the two parties. The 7-year-old had no interest in who would emerge the victor of the battle. He had no intentions of letting his subordinates, as well as Rihanna's subordinates, participate in a war. They were already struggling to survive in Solterra. Being thrown onto the battlefield was the last thing that they wanted to happen. While all this was happening, Norris was currently entertaining a guest who had arrived at his establishment just an hour ago. Tell me more about this scion whom you sold the Domini Mortis to, a woman wearing a black robe said. Is he really just a boy? Yes, Norris replied. I don't know his exact age, but I'm pretty certain that he's not more than 10 years old. Also, he doesn't act his age, which is why I find him interesting. When was the last time you saw him? The woman asked. A few days ago, Norris answered. He was in need of slaves, so he bought 10 trolls and 2 ogres. He also requested a few favors from me, like helping him purchase metals, and he asked if I knew someone who could help him build a simple forge in the warehouse that he is renting from me. Metals and a forge? The woman frowned. Does he plan to do smithing? Perhaps. Norris shrugged. I did not want to be nosy, so I didn't ask him for details. Are you planning to investigate him? Yes, the woman replied. After all, he might be the one I am looking for. Norris nodded his head in understanding. Just be careful, okay? Norris said after sipping his tea. I can tell that he isn't an ordinary boy. It is best that you do things in moderation. I did my best to befriend him, so don't make me lose my hard work, okay? Worry not, the woman stated. I just want to know if he will be able to help us with the thing that is troubling us. He's still a child. I don't think he's able to do the impossible. There's always a first time for everything. Norris sighed. To think our organization has regressed to the point where we have to put our faith in a child who is not even 10 years of age. The woman nodded her head in agreement, but she still said what was on her mind. Norris, even a pebble can make small ripples in a lake, the woman said before walking towards the door. No matter how small that ripple is, it might lead to an outcome that all of us have overlooked. Norris watched the woman leave his office with a frown on his face. Although he believed that 13 was impressive for his age, this wasn't his first time seeing such a promising child. He just didn't want his acquaintance to overestimate the boy, who still hadn't grown into being a man, and expect him to create a miracle that they had been hopelessly trying to achieve for the past decade. While 13, Christopher, and Rihanna were eating in the dining room, something flew in from outside of the window and landed on top of the table. "Welcome back, Vasego," 13 said before pouring water into a bowl and placing it in front of the dumb-looking bird. He then grabbed a bowl of nuts that he had prepared in advance and also pushed it toward the bird, who was busy drinking water from the bowl. This was the 4th day since the bird had left to do his mission, and he had returned to report his findings. However, since there were people inside the room aside from his master, Vasego just drank and ate before closing his eyes to rest. Christopher and Rihanna watched the bird with great curiosity, but the two of them didn't do anything to disturb its rest. "Young master, what is this creature?" Christopher asked. But before the 13 could answer, Rihanna beat him into it. "It's a poco-poco," Rihanna replied. "It's a bird that can imitate almost all sounds, even the voices of people. They can be very noisy and a pain to deal with." "Oh." Christopher frowned as he looked at the sleeping bird before shifting his gaze to his young master. The chubby boy knew that 13 wouldn't do anything unnecessary or things that didn't serve a purpose. Since that was the case, he kept his silence and just focused on his meal. He was certain that his young master would tell him more about it once they were alone. An hour later, Christopher and Rihanna went to do their duties, while 13 took Vasego to his room. "It is as you expected," Vasego said after the 7-year-old firmly locked the door behind him. "The Tigerkins are also preparing for a large-scale battle. It seems that they have finally decided to reclaim all the cities that were captured by the barbarians during their raids." 13 sat on a chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "So the barbarians kept on poking the tiger in the eye, and they've finally angered it," 13 smirked. "I bet they are regretting their decision now." Although the Tigerkins were still weakened from their war against the Valbarra kingdom and their failed expansion in the barbarian lands, they would still go all out once they were pushed into a corner. That was a trait of the majority of the Beastkin race. Some Beastkins were pacifists, but the Tigerkins were one of the Beastkins that didn't shy away from battle. "This conflict is going to be bloody," 13 thought. Once the Tigerkins reclaim the territories that were taken from them by the barbarians, they might continue to charge forward due to their momentum. Although Groner City was a distance away from the front lines, it was not impossible for them to get raided by the Tigerkins, who were able to pass over the barbarians' borders. "Can you give me an estimate of how soon the fight will start?" 13 asked. The Poco pondered a bit before giving an estimate. "I believe that it will take them 2 months before they start reclaiming the cities that were taken over by the barbarians," Vasego replied. "But there is also a possibility that it will happen earlier. The safest timeline I can give you is just a month. Whatever your plans are in the Warzer Plains, you need to finish them in a month. If you stay too long in that region, there is a high possibility that you will get sandwiched between the two warring factions." 13 nodded. "A month is a bit tight, but since we have no choice, we just have to do it. How about the information about the Beacon of Light? Did you get any leads?" Vasego shook his head. "No. Even the wind spirits that I talked to didn't know anything about it." A sigh escaped the 7-year-old's lips because he had already expected this scenario. "In any case, you gave me valuable information," 13 said with a smile. "Good job, Vasego. Did you also accomplish your 2 other missions?" "I did," Vasego replied. "The purple-furred honey badger is currently roaming the northern edges of the Warzer Plains. For now, it is safe to hunt within a 100-mile radius of Groner City. As for the jinn that are prevalent in these lands, I only found the golden-eyed hyenas roaming the plains. The stronger ones hunt solo, while the rest hunt in groups of 6 to 10. Their den is located in the northwestern region of the Warzer Plains, and the one leading them is a rank 5 overlord. The chances of you encountering their leader are almost non-existent as long as you don't purposely head to their lair." 13 nodded in understanding. Vasego's report matched the information he saw in his database. Even though 300 years had passed, the golden-eyed hyenas were still the jinns that monopolized the Sumatran region. Still, the golden-eyed hyenas are tough opponents, 13 thought. If we're not careful, they might call for reinforcements and have us surrounded. It is not worth the risk. After listening to Visego's complete report, 13 finalized the route that his hunting party would take for maximum efficiency. Since their time was limited, they would be targeting specific groups of monsters in order to farm their monster parts. He trusted Visego's estimate of 1 month before the large-scale battle between the barbarians and the tigerkins started. Because of this, he decided to embark on their hunting trip as soon as he finished bidding for the Chad skunk in the auction that would be held in 2 days. I'll just have to find another way to obtain the 5-leaf clover, 13 mused. If my guess is correct, the beacon of light will appear when the war between the barbarians and tigerkins is in full swing. We'll just have to wait until then. After organizing his thoughts, he went to see the progress of their preparations for their upcoming expedition. Somewhere in the Houdini Desert, Harry's face was grim as he looked at the teenagers who were under his command. Their numbers had decreased to 6 after they were ambushed by trolls during one of their hunts in the Houdini Desert. To make matters worse, they were forced to abandon more than half of their food supplies in their haste to escape the pursuit of the troll hunting party. Beaten and battered, they decided to head east to the barbarian lands, where they believed they would find a safe place to hide from the monsters, who seemed to have increased their hunting activities in the region. Colbert was one of the teenagers who barely managed to survive the ambush. Deep in his heart, he was cursing Harry for his poor leadership judgment. If he had only listened to me when I said we should have taken a different route, none of this would have happened. Colbert gnashed his teeth in anger, but he had no choice but to hold his feelings back. Harry was stronger than him, and if he tried anything funny, the scion from the Remington clan could kill him without a second thought. What Colbert didn't know was that Harry was also blaming him in his heart because if not for the teenage boy's insistence to hunt near the territory of the trolls, none of this would have happened. They were doing quite well as they hunted the other monsters in the Houdini Desert, but Colbert became too greedy due to their success. The other teenagers, who had become overconfident of their victories, decided to agree to his proposal to move closer to the trolls' domain in the hopes that they could get an avatar like Christopher's. I should have followed Zion and Rihanna and left these people behind, Harry thought bitterly. I knew that this person was bad luck from the start. Unfortunately, no matter how much Harry regretted it, the damage had already been done. He could only hope that by going east he would once again meet up with Zion and Rihanna, whom he believed were better teammates than the bastard Colbert, who had almost sentenced their entire party to their doom. The day of the auction had arrived. 13 and Christopher made their way towards the auction house with the assistance of Norris. Since he had ordered Jubii to accompany Rihanna and her hunting party to the Houdini Desert, he needed a guardian to follow him to the auction house, so that he would be allowed to enter. Fortunately, Norris was planning to sell several of his slaves in the auction house, so he was given a VIP room. This was also one of the favors that the 7-year-old had asked the slave master when he met with him last time. Norris agreed because he knew that 13 planned to bid for the Chad skunk, which was one of the monsters that the boy had chosen, alongside the Poco, whom the boy named Visego. When they entered the VIP room, the 7-year-old noticed that there was already someone inside it. However, he wasn't able to see what the person looked like because they were wearing a black hooded robe that covered their entire body, including their head. I'd like to introduce you to an acquaintance of mine, Zion, Norris said. Her name is Adira. She is a shaman, so if you are in need of shamanic services, you can talk to her while she is still in the city. The woman named Adira nodded before taking off the hood that covered her head. 13's eyes narrowed, while Christopher's eyes widened in shock. A drow, 13 thought. Norris has interesting friends. D-drow. Christopher gasped in shock. Unlike 13, who generally had a good grasp of his emotions, the chubby boy took a step back and even hid behind the younger and smaller boy, who did his best to keep the corner of his lips from twitching. An amused giggle escaped Adira's lips as she walked towards the 7-year-old, who was looking at her with a calm expression on his face. It's a pleasure to meet you, little friends, Adira said as she looked down at the two of them. My name is Adira, and I'll be staying in Groner City for a month. I have heard many interesting things about you from my friend, Norris. It is an honor to finally meet you, Zion. The honor is mine, Lady Adira, Zion replied with a respectful bow. This boy behind me is Christopher. He is my direct subordinate. Christopher? Adira eyed the chubby boy, who was peeking at her from behind 13's back. I'll try to remember him. Just like all drow, Adira had long silver hair and jet-black skin. Her eyes that were as red as rubies were looking at him with great interest, as if she was looking at a very rare specimen. It was not as sharp as the gazes of the drow that 13 had met in the past, which made him assume that Adira might be one of the exiled people of her race. Drows were very arrogant by nature. They believed that they were superior to other races, and they were very narrow-minded. In short, you had a better chance of winning an argument with a rock than winning an argument with a drow. Come, Adira made a gesture towards the couch. Let us all sit and make ourselves comfortable while we wait for the auction to start. 13 nodded. Let's go, Christopher. Don't worry, Lady Adira won't bite you. Oh, but I might, Adira said in a teasing tone. Your subordinate looks very plump and tasty. I bet he will taste delicious when roasted. Ooh-hee! Christopher almost peed his pants when the drow extended her hands to lightly pinch his chubby cheeks. One of the races that wanderers had to be wary of the most were drows. Those who were unlucky enough to be sent to their underground cities would find themselves experiencing a fate worse than that of slaves. Drows were known for their cruelty because it was their way of showing their supremacy to others. Weakness was not an option for their race, so hurting others was a sign of a competent and powerful drow. Since they couldn't always hurt their own people, anyone that is not of their race was fair game. The chances of teenage wanderers surviving in drow cities was lower compared to the Houdini Desert. Those who were lucky enough to survive would live for a few years before they were killed due to torture. The truly lucky ones who managed to gain the favor of their owners would be able to live for a long time. However, some spent their entire lifetimes living underground, never to see the surface world ever again. Lady Adira, please don't tease Christopher too much, 13 said. He gets scared easily. Forgive me, little one, Adira replied. My teasing went too far. Well then, sit and make yourselves comfortable. 13 nodded and sat on the couch in the center of the room. Christopher hurriedly sat on his young master's right side, while Adira sat on the 7-year-old's left side. Norris sat on the couch beside them, having it all for himself. I heard from Norris that you plan to bid for the Chad skunk, Adira said. Aside from that stinky monster, do you plan to bid on other items? I do, 13 answered. But I don't think I'll have enough funds to bid for it. Oh, what are you planning to bid for aside from the Chad skunk? The 5-leaf clover. Norris and Adira exchanged glances before a faint smile appeared on the drow's face. Excellent choice, Adira commented. Although it may not be as powerful as an elixir, it can certainly save someone who suffered from a serious injury. I'm sure that there will be a lot of people who will want to bid for it. I know, 13 replied. If I don't get it now, I'll just find another way to get one. Adira eyed the black snake coiled around the boy's neck with an appraising gaze. Tiona was also paying close attention to the drow and flicked her tongue in her direction repeatedly. She knew who this drow was because she was the one that handed her to Norris to be put on auction. If not for the fact that 13 had managed to get Norris' interest, which allowed him to look at the slaves that he wanted to auction, the Domini Mortis might have been one of the creatures that would be displayed in the auction house today. Adira asked 13 a lot of personal questions, and the boy answered those he could answer. In exchange, he also asked Adira a lot of questions about the lands surrounding the Sumatran kingdom, which the drow also answered to the best of her abilities. While waiting for the auction to start, 13 and Adira talked about many things, including how the Valbarra Archipelago was formed. Adira even challenged the 7-year-old to tell her the myth of how the archipelago came into being. If he got it right, the boy would be able to ask her for one favor. Seeing that this was a perfect opportunity to form a connection with the drow, the boy decided to humor her and tell her what was written in his database about the lands they were currently in. The Valbarra archipelago was composed of 3 main islands and a few small islands that were only a few hundreds of meters in length. It was an archipelago that was a good distance away from the main continent. Although the distance was great, several merchants would often visit the Sumatran kingdom to trade with the Tigerkins and the barbarians. The former capital of the Valbarra kingdom, which the Tigerkins had conquered, was located in the center of these 3 main islands. The Houdini Desert, as well as the territories of the barbarians, were located on the biggest island, which the Tigerkins wished to conquer as well. The last and final island was a small one and only around a mile long. However, none dared to lay claim over it because it was a sacred land where the fallen angel, Fornius, was worshipped. According to legend, the sea monster, Fornius, had a quarrel with the deity of the sea, Rahab, 13 said. Since the two couldn't see eye to eye, the two of them fought in the sea, causing volcanoes to erupt under the water, which created the Valbarra archipelago. The battle ended in a draw, and Rahab left Fornius alone to rest on one of the islands that had been formed during their battle. Since then, Fornius was treated as the main deity of the Valbarra kingdom, and they would only go to the 3rd island, which they called Ennis Island, to perform ceremonies and sacrifices in honor of the monster of the sea, Fornius. Even after the Tigerkins had changed the name of the kingdom to the Sumatran kingdom, they still followed the tradition of honoring Fornius, for they would be stupid not to do so. The reason? Because the deities that all the races in the world worshipped were real. It would be a folly to offend such beings even if they weren't considered true gods. You sure know how to give a history lesson. Adira smiled. But it makes me wonder, how do you know about this story? I heard this story from an old man whom we encountered while on the way to this city, 13 replied. And where is this old man now? Adira inquired. I don't know, 13 replied. We parted ways when we reached the city. If you see that old man again, would you be able to recognize him? Probably. Christopher, who was seated beside his young master, kept his head lowered so that no one could see the expression on his face. He didn't know when and where the 7-year-old had learned of the history of the Valbarra archipelago because he was certain that they hadn't met an old storyteller on their way to the city. But seeing that Adira wasn't correcting him, it only meant that what the 7-year-old had said was true. Norris, who was also paying close attention to the two, was quite impressed because this was the first time he had seen the drow talk this much with someone she just met. She kept the conversation going as she tried to pry some more useful information about Zion's background out. 13 answered most of the questions she threw at him, but most of his answers were fabricated anyway. Of course, Adira didn't believe all of 13's answers, but that was fine. She was just trying to better understand the 7-year-old, who was becoming more and more mysterious in her eyes. Suddenly, a loud and excited voice spread inside the auction house. Good day, everyone. The moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived. A beautiful lady stood on the stage and waved at everyone. Using an artifact that amplified the sound of her voice, she declared that the auction was about to start. 13 and Adira, who had been talking just a few seconds ago, focused their attention on the stage to look at the host of today's event. My name is Dora, and I will be your host for today, Dora stated. Now, before we start, I will just remind everyone of the rules of the auction house. Threatening your fellow bidders to stop bidding is not allowed. Do not forget that the auction house is under the city lord's management. If you don't want to be exiled from and blacklisted in Groner City, make sure to pay attention to this rule. Shouts of agreement echoed in the venue before Dora continued to share the rules of the auction. Those who are purposely raising the bid despite not having the money to purchase the items that they are bidding for will be punished accordingly by the laws of the auction house. All of their limbs will be crippled and their tongues cut out from their mouths. After that, they will be fed to the ogres for the crime of going against the law of the city lord. So, if you plan to cause trouble to this auction house, I assure you that you will only end up having a very painful and gruesome death. Now, we go to the third rule, Dora said with a smile. Any act of violence, especially physical violence, is not allowed within the auction house. Offenders will be beaten up and thrown into prison for an unknown period of time. The fourth rule is that, regardless of your background, you cannot throw your weight around in this place. Offenders will immediately be escorted out of the auction house and blacklisted from entry into the city. Last but not the least, there are no returns or refunds for the things that you have purchased in the auction house. We will not honor such claims. Dora scanned the auction house with a confident smile on her face. Now that all the rules have been mentioned, it is now time to officially start the auction. Dora declared. Bring in the first item. As of the moment, 13 only had a little over 58,000 silver coins remaining. He only hoped to purchase the Chad skunk from the auction house, but if there was something else that caught his attention, he would bid on it as well. Of course, he would set a fixed amount of coins for that item, so if it went past his limit, he would have no choice but to give up on it. Norris saw the faint smile on Adira's face and already knew what his acquaintance was thinking. But, since both of them were on the same side, he had no intention of getting in her way. The people of their organization were all working toward the same goal. Regardless of the methods they used or the fields they specialized in, all of them were headed in the same direction. Norris only hoped that the drow fully understood the consequences of her actions, which might hinder them from finishing their mission in the Sumatran kingdom that had taken them many years, resources, and effort to infiltrate. 2,500. 3,000. 5,000. 10,000. 10,000. Dora shouted. Going once, going twice, sold. Congratulations to number 69. Feel free to claim your crystal sword after the auction is over. Everyone, we will need a bit of time to prepare the next batch of items to be auctioned, so we are going to take a short break. With the sixth item being successfully auctioned, the tension inside the auction house was starting to rise. Because of this, Dora decided to take a short break so that people would calm down a bit before the bidding for the next batch of merchandise started. 13 also made a bid for the crystal sword, but the budget that he had set for himself was only 5,000 silver coins. Since someone had bid 10,000 coins for it, he no longer made an effort to outbid his competitor and just waited for the next item to appear on the stage. Christopher, who was seated by his side, asked the question that had been nagging on his head ever since he arrived in the barbarian city. Young master, I noticed that they only use silver coins here as a currency, Christopher said. Don't they have gold coins? Norris and Adira both smiled after hearing the chubby boy's question. However, the two of them didn't answer and waited to see if the 7-year-old also knew why gold wasn't used in the Sumatran kingdom. They don't have gold coins, but the Sumatran kingdom has a lot of gold deposits in it, 13 replied. Since they have gold, why don't they use it as currency? It's because they can't use it, 13 answered. Hundreds of years ago, when the Sumatran kingdom was still the Valbarra kingdom, a great plague spread across the land. This plague threatened to wipe out all the living things within the 3 main islands of the Valbarra Archipelago. Things were very dire back then, and the people, who were desperate to find a cure, asked Fornius for help. Although the sea monster was an unruly being, it was capable of showing mercy to those who worshipped it. Because of this, it went out of its way to seek out the help of the deity of plagues, Wormwood, to ask it to cure its followers from the plague. However, Wormwood rejected Fornius' request because it didn't find any value in agreeing to the sea monster's request, who did nothing but throw tantrums whenever it wanted, drowning entire civilizations in the process. As the deity of plagues and pestilence, Wormwood could cure any disease in the world. But it was a very moody deity. When it wanted to help, it would gladly do it. When it didn't want to help, it would be very hard to make it think otherwise. Since Fornius only used strength and violence to make others see reason, it was unable to convince Wormwood due to the fact that Wormwood helped it once in the past. A faint smile appeared on 13's face when he remembered the giant sea monster, whom his host had seen twice during his lifetime. He could still remember that domineering form, and although he didn't want to admit it, he felt that Fornius was a kindred spirit who wanted to defy the order of the world and do things that it wanted, regardless of the consequences. You see, Fornius would not hesitate to offend all the deities, but it didn't dare offend Wormwood, 13 continued his explanation. There was a time when the deity of plagues and pestilence helped it when it was seriously injured after the sea monster fought against 2 of the 7 celestials. Since then, Fornius never sought trouble for Wormwood, making it the only deity that was exempted from Fornius aggression. In Solterra there were 14 deities who shared control over the world. They were divided into two groups, which were the 7 celestials and the 7 fiends. These deities weren't really at war with each other, and even helped one another during times of need. Fornius was considered to be the black sheep of their family because it didn't give a hoot about what the celestials and the fiends had to say. If one of them annoyed it, the sea monster would fight tooth and nail against them, so most of the deities just don't want to get themselves involved with Fornius, who would bite anyone who dared to touch it. Even so, the sailors as well as those who lived near the sea worshipped Fornius alongside the deity of the sea, Rahab, because they were the two beings who shared dominion over the vast seas and oceans of the world. After getting rejected by Wormwood, Fornius decided to seek out another fiend, whom it believed had the connections to help its followers. The one he sought was another member of the 7 fiends, and it was none other than the deity of greed and wealth, Mammon. As you may already know, all the merchants and businessmen of the world worship Mammon because although it was a greedy deity, it was also the deity that introduced currency to the world, allowing all races to have a common ground when it came to trade and commerce. Surprisingly, Mammon agreed to help Fornius, on the condition that all the gold in the Valbarra archipelago would belong to him. The sea monster was a creature that had no need for gold, so it readily agreed to Mammon's condition. After coming to an agreement, Mammon went to seek the help of one of the 7 celestials, who was also known as the most intelligent among all the deities. Its name is Brahman, and with its help, they were able to devise a plan to convince Wormwood to produce a cure to help cure the plague of the Valbarra archipelago. I will not go into details on what that plan was, but after getting the cure, the islanders were all cured and even developed a very strong resistance against plagues and diseases. Mammon then made a declaration that all the gold in the Valbarra archipelago belonged to it, and anyone who tried to steal its property would suffer a fate worse than death. Since then, no one in the archipelago dared to mine any gold or use it as currency. The merchants and traders, who also visit these islands, don't bring any gold with them and only use silver coins to trade with the people living in these islands. When 13 finished his explanation, a clapping sound echoed inside the room. "Well said, Zion," Norris said after he finished applauding the 7-year-old. "How did you know this story? Do you remember the old man I mentioned a while ago?" 13 asked. "He is the one that told me this story." "I see, I would like to meet this old man one day." Norris smirked. "Same here." Adira smiled. 13 faintly smiled because he could tell that the 2 adults were willing to overlook his bullsh*t. Suddenly, Dora's voice once again spread in the auction house, which meant that the second round of bidding was about to commence. "Sorry for the long wait," Dora shouted. "Now, instead of weapons, we will be auctioning slaves and monsters. So, those of you who are interested, make sure to open your purses wide because we have a good selection of slaves, waiting for all of you to bid for." Now, to spice things up, the first monster that will be up for auction is the Chad skunk. As you may already know, this monster is not native to the Sumatran kingdom and is only found in the main continent. It is capable of unleashing a stinky spray that extends up to 20 meters. So, if you don't want to smell like a pigsty and rotten eggs combined, you should not be at the receiving end of this monster's anger. The barbarians all laughed after hearing Dora's explanation. The majority of them didn't know if it was a good monster to bid for or not. Only the intelligent ones understood its strategic value, and these people were raring to go once the bidding started. 13 also focused his attention as he looked at 2-meter tall Chad skunk, who was bound by special chains, preventing it from escaping its slave trader that was tasked to present it to the people in the auction house. Norris and Adira both smiled because they knew that this was one of the 2 things that 13 wished to get in the auction. As to whether the 7-year-old would succeed to bid for it or not, the 2 adults were looking forward to seeing what would happen next. The Chad skunk bidding will start with 1,000 silvers, and the minimum bid increment is 100 silvers, Dora explained. Bidding starts now. 1,100. 1,500. 2,000. 2,100. 13 remained silent as the price of the Chad skunk slowly rose. As a creature that was native to the Sumatran kingdom, owning one was like having an extremely rare pet that no one else would have. Simply put, there was only one Chad skunk in the entirety of the Valbarra archipelago, and whoever owned it would definitely use it for bragging rights. Norris had carefully imported monsters that could only be found on the main continent. He knew that profits could be earned if he played his cards wisely, so he didn't allow 13 to take both the Poco and the Chad skunk from his collection. He made him choose which one was more important, and 13 chose the Poco. Now, he had to win the bidding for the Chad skunk, whose price had reached 5,000 silver coins. 5,000 silver coins? Dora shouted. Going once. 5,100. 13 shouted. The old man, who looked like someone in his late 60s, glanced in 13's direction and frowned. His VIP room was right across Norris' VIP room, so he was able to see the face of the boy who outbid him. 5,400, the old man stated. 5,600, 13 declared. 6,000. 6,200. 6,500. 6,600. The old man stared daggers at the boy, but the latter ignored him. Norris knew who the man was and couldn't help but smell trouble brewing in the air. He was tempted to tell 13 that he should probably not continue bidding because the person he was bidding against was someone working for the city lord. However, he kept his silence because it was not his place to interfere with what the boy wanted. 8,000, the old man shouted. Clearly, he had reached the limit of his patience and decided to increase the bid for the monster. Even though the Chad skunk was rare, he only planned to buy it for 5,000 silver coins. The most skilled slaves in the slave market wouldn't even reach that price range, so when he bid for 5,000 silver coins, he thought that he already had it in the bag. Unfortunately, there was a person who understood the value of the Chad skunk and decided to outbid him, making him feel very annoyed. 9,000. 13 wasn't fazed by the old man's bid and raised the price by 1,000 silver. 10,000, the old man shouted. Let's see if you can outbid me, boy. The limit that he had set for the Chad skunk had now doubled, and he was truly getting angry because he still planned to buy other rare monsters and slaves, but the 7-year-old was getting in his way. 15,000, 13 stated. I can do this all day, you smelly old man. Smelly old man? Wah! Someone wearing a bull mask and sitting beside the old man in the same VIP room burst out in laughter after hearing 13's declaration. Several other high-ranking officials who helped maintain Groner City also wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to do it. In the end, they just covered their lips as their body shook from time to time in an attempt to stop themselves from laughing out loud. Knowing the identity of the old man, they didn't dare to challenge his authority by laughing. Zion, I think it is best that you stop bidding now before it's too late, Norris said with a solemn expression on his face. That person is one of the higher-ups of Groner City. If you offend him, things might become difficult for you in the future. 13 frowned after hearing Norris' words. The last thing he wanted was to offend one of the officials of the city. Although he was reluctant, he decided to no longer bid for the Chad skunk if the old man were to outbid him again. However, the old man remained silent and only glared in 13's direction. Dora's smile was strained as he looked at the two VIP rooms who were outbidding each other just a while ago. But since this was her job, she steeled her resolve and raised her voice. 15,000 silver coins. Dora shouted. Going once. Going twice. Sold to customer number 13. You can claim your monster right after the auction ends. Christopher, Norris, and Adira had no words to say after 13 had won. If he wasn't bidding against one of the officials of Groner City, all three of them would be congratulating him right now. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Before Dora could even present the next monster to be auctioned, 13 suddenly spoke up, catching everyone's attention. Old man, since I respect my elders, I will give you the Chad skunk as a gift, 13 said as he gave the old man a respectful bow. My name is Zion, and I present you with this gift at our first meeting. The old man, who went by the name Netero, already planned to make the boy suffer after the auction ended for getting in his way. However, this sudden twist, which caught him completely by surprise, made the anger he was feeling decrease by a bit. Oh, why did you suddenly change your mind? Netero asked. Are you having cold feet after calling me a smelly old man? No, 13 replied. You remind me of my grandpa who raised me since I was a boy. Although we were poor, both of us were able to survive by relying on each other. Unfortunately, he passed away while we were traveling together. I can still remember his words before he died. He told me that I should always respect old people because they are the most compassionate and generous of all people. I just got too emotional because you shouted at me earlier and called me a boy. Even my grandpa never shouted at me, yet you did, so I got angry. I felt like I was getting bullied. But you are still a boy. Everyone in the auction house thought along those lines. But since the two were talking seriously, they decided to not get in the way of the discussion and simply watched how things would end. Netero played with his beard a few times before nodding his head. Fine, Netero stated. I will let bygones be bygones with this. You can keep the Chad skunk because I am a kind and compassionate old man. I don't want to be seen as an elder bullying a child. Thank you, handsome grandpa, 13 replied. You are the best. Netero nodded with a smile. You can now continue the auction, Dora. Why yes. Dora replied before making a gesture to the staff to bring the next item for sale. Norris and Adira were quite impressed by the way Zion had handled the matter with one of the high-ranking officials of the city. Unbelievable, Norris thought. To think that he managed to defuse the situation by taking a step back and making up a story on the spot. This boy is the real deal. Even Adira couldn't help but be impressed with the 7-year-old's witty action. He might really be the one that the master is looking for, Adira mused. I need to take him back to the headquarters by hook or by crook. 13, who had no idea about what Norris and Adira were thinking, was paying close attention to Netero. Seeing that the old man was no longer showing any hostility to him and even seemed to have changed his opinion of him, he smiled faintly. If he could make a connection with the old man, then he might be able to use it as leverage to acquire things in the city that he would need in the future. He was someone who looked at the bigger picture, and anything that might affect his plans should be dealt with at all costs. 13 didn't know that the man wearing a bull mask, who was seated beside Netero, was also paying close attention to him. There was no one in the city who dared call Netero a smelly old man, which was the reason why he burst out laughing earlier. Earlier, he pitied the boy because he knew that his right-hand man would make the child's life miserable after the auction. So when 13 suddenly made peace with Netero, he found the kid to his liking. A daring slave boy, and he is with Norris, the man wearing the bull mask thought. I guess I'll give him a visit later. The man was none other than the city lord of Groner City, Arthas, and the moment he saw 13, he thought that the boy resembled his boldness, when he was his age. Originally, 13 only planned to buy 2 items from the auction. The first one was the Chad skunk, which was a monster that could help them deter stronger opponents with its stink spray. The second one was the 5-leaf clover, which he needed for his 13 trials. Right now, the money he had left to bid only amounted to a little over 43,000 silver coins. When he asked Norris for an estimate of how much people were willing to bid for the 5-leaf clover, the price he gave was around 30,000 silver coins at the minimum. Since it was a life-saving consumable item, many top hunters from Groner City would splurge to get it. After all, their life was more important than money. Securing the 5-leaf clover was no different from having a second chance at life. But when Dora announced the next item to be auctioned, 13 wavered. Everyone, our next item for auction is the Dark Wing Bow, Dora announced. This is a pseudo-low-grade silver weapon imported from the main continent. Its shooting range could reach up to 2,000 meters as long as you have the strength to pull back its bowstring. Made from the bones of the Night Wing, it's very light and easy to carry but still extremely flexible and sturdy. It also comes with 5 quivers of arrows, with arrowheads made from orichalcum. If you are proficient in long-range hunting, then this bow is good for you. The initial bidding price is 5,000 silver coins. The minimum bid increment is 100 silver coins. Let the auction begin. 5,000. 5,300. 5,500. 6,000. 13 leaned forward and rested his chin on the back of his intertwined hands. Right now, he was in dire need of a good range weapon. After looking through the bows that were for sale in the city, he only saw low-grade bronze bows, which could still be used to hunt. However, he wanted something better like a mid-grade or peak-grade bronze weapon. But now, a pseudo-low-grade silver weapon was right in front of him. While it was called a pseudo-low-grade silver weapon, its rank was still technically bronze grade, which meant that 13 could use it as a weapon. However, he knew well that if he bid for this bow, his chances of winning the bid for the 5-leaf clover would disappear completely. Right now, 13 was in a dilemma. He had to choose between what he wanted and what he needed. While the bidding was going higher and higher, the 7-year-old sighed in his heart and raised his voice. 15,000. The previous bid for the dark wing bow was 10,000 silver coins. He was certain that it would still go up, so he decided to raise the price instantly in order to deter the other people from bidding. 15,000. Dora shouted. Going once. Going twice. 16,000. Netero glanced at the man sitting next to him with a faint smile on his face. The man wearing a bull mask looked at the 7-year-old who was now looking in his direction. 16,100, 13 stated. 17,000, the man wearing a bull mask countered. 17,100. 18,000. 18,100. 13 was sure that the man bidding against him was also one of the high-ranking officials of Groner City. However, unlike Netero who really wanted the Chad skunk earlier, the vibes that the masked man was giving him were of someone who was just purposely making things difficult for him. He didn't know if the man was doing this as a way to get payback for what he did to Netero earlier, but he was certain of one thing. The masked man wasn't really interested in the dark wing bow. He was more interested in seeing the 7-year-old child in a tight spot, so he was purposely raising the bidding price to mess with him. Looks like he found a new toy to play with, Netero mused. What a sick hobby. Even going so far as to bully a child. Netero completely forgot that he also planned to bully the 7-year-old right after the auction ended because he didn't get the Chad skunk that he had his eyes on earlier. 19,000, the masked man said. I can do this all day, boy. 19,100, 13 didn't reply and simply bidded for the bow. If the man was the person whom he thought it was, 13 knew that his chances of winning were 0. How could he possibly beat the man who stood in the highest seat of power? The boy understood that since he was wearing a mask to hide his identity and was sitting beside Netero, whom Norris said was a high-ranking official of the city, the chances of him being the city lord himself were very high. 13 knew this, yet he still bid for the weapon. Looking at the masked man, he felt as if he was facing one of those heroes who had stepped upon the dignity of his hosts, just because they could. No matter how much they struggled and no matter what they did, fate and luck weren't on their side, so in the end, they were bound to lose. 13 had vowed to himself to fight against fate, so even if he knew that it was hopeless and pointless, he planned to see this bidding war through to the end. 23,000, the masked man said in a voice filled with amusement. 23,100. 24,000. 24,100. Knowing that it was useless to bid a higher price because he would be outbid by his competitor, 13 simply added 100 silver coins to whatever the man was going to bid. This was his own way of telling him that even if he lost the bidding, he would still cling to the bitter end. The masked man laughed as he looked at the 7-year-old, who still had a calm expression on his face. Let's raise the stakes a bit. 40,000 silver coins. The city lord of Groner City, Arthas, was quite impressed that the boy had that much money in him. However, since he wanted to see the calmness on the boy's face disappear, he purposely raised his bid to 40,000 silver coins. The dark wing bow might be expensive, but the current bid had gone way above and beyond the target that the seller had imagined. They were making a lot of profit for the item and they would definitely be extremely happy at the end of the day after getting so much money from the auction. But to everyone's surprise, a firm and unyielding voice echoed within the auction house. 40,100, 13 replied. 50,000, the masked man stated in an arrogant tone. A moment of silence descended before a ruckus erupted inside the auction as the people watching from the sidelines made their anger toward the masked man known. Seeing the injustice that was happening around them, the barbarians weren't able to hold it back and shouted at the masked man, who was clearly bullying the 7-year-old bidding for the dark wing bow. Have you no shame? You're bullying a kid, one of the bidders spoke out loud, feeling that enough was enough. He understood that he might get in trouble for making his opinion known, but he was unable to endure the blatant bullying that the masked man was doing. That's right. Are you really a man? A woman in her late 30s shouted. Leave the poor boy alone. Here. I was just waiting for your exchange to end, but it is starting to get on my nerves. If you want that bow so badly, just buy it outright. The other people in the auction also raised their voices of disapproval, but the masked man was unfazed. Dora, who didn't know how to proceed due to the commotion, was alternately looking at the 2 VIP rooms with anxiety on her beautiful face. 13 no longer had the funds to bid, and just stared at the masked man with the same calm gaze that he had earlier. He knew that struggling from the start was futile, and yet he still continued to do it. Because it reminded him of the destinies of his previous hosts. No matter how much they struggled, their ending was already set in stone. He hated it, which was the reason why he decided to defy the system god and fight against fate. 13's gaze lingered on the masked man for a few more seconds before shifting his attention to Dora, who was standing on top of the stage. Everyone thought that he would still bid, but he kept his silence, which meant that he would no longer bid for the dark wing bow. 50,000! Dora shouted after seeing that things had finally reached a conclusion. Going once. Going twice. Congratulations to customer number 1. Please collect your dark wing bow after the auction ends. Norris and Adira looked at the 7-year-old, whose presence had suddenly become so serene and still, like the surface of a lake. But underneath the calmness of his expression, a fire raged in 13's heart. The auction continued, and after the 18th item had been auctioned, Dora once again told everyone that they would have a short break to prepare the next batch of items that would be sold. The finale was coming, so everyone was pumped up to bid for the last selection of items, which were considered the best among all the items that were prepared in today's auction. Netero and the masked man took a break, looking at Groner City from on top of the auction house. You're such a child, Netero said with a mischievous smile on his face. What did that poor boy do to deserve bullying from someone like you? He needs to be brought down a peg, the masked man replied. That's the reason why I decided to deny him the thing that he wanted. And are you going to continue to deny him of the things he would bid for? Of course, the sooner he realizes that he can't have everything he wants, the sooner he will strive to surpass those who have stepped on him in his youth. Looks like someone is talking from experience, Netero commented as he played with his beard. Are you telling me that the boy reminds you of your younger self? The masked man hummed. Pride without the power to back it up is not pride but stupidity. So you say, but I was also paying attention to that boy while you were bidding against him, Netero smiled. He knew that you were just purposely messing with him and had long accepted that he would not win against you. So why did he continue bidding? Do you even need to ask? Didn't you also feel like rebelling when you were a child? Although you know that you will not get what you want, you still make things difficult for others. You might have won, but you still spent 50,000 silver coins. 50,000 is nothing to me, the masked man stated. You're missing the point, Netero replied. You might have won the battle, but you have lost the war. What you gained was just a dark wing bow that you won't probably even use in your life. On the contrary, the boy gained the recognition of everyone in the auction house. You got a bow, but he got fame. I say he got the better deal out of that bidding war. I hate to say this, but the brat is way better than you were when he was your age. The masked man snorted but didn't say anything to refute the old man. So silly. Netero shook his head helplessly as he headed towards the staircase to return to their VIP room. You're now a full-fledged man, but deep inside, you are still a child. The masked man didn't follow Netero right away and continued to look over his city with his arms crossed over his chest. A few minutes later, he turned around to return to his VIP room to see if there were any other items that were worthy of his attention. Are you okay, young master? Christopher asked in a worried tone. I'm fine, 13 replied. You don't have to worry about me, Christopher. But, young master, I'm certain that the masked man will also get in the way when you bid for the 5-leaf clover. I know. 13 then turned around to look at the chubby boy who had a worried expression on his face. Then what are you going to do, young master? Christopher inquired. The corner of the 7-year-old's lips curled up into a smirk, making the chubby boy shudder. This was the first time he had seen this kind of look on his young master's face, and it made him feel as if Zion was going to do something very evil. Stay here, Christopher, 13 said as he walked down the stairs. I'm just going to take a little stroll. Norris and Adira, who saw the younger boy's evil smirk, both frowned. Although they didn't know what the 7-year-old was going to do, they had the same thought as Christopher. Zion was up to no good. After leaving the VIP room, Zion went to the treasury where the auctioned items were being kept. Boy, this place is off limits, one of the guards guarding the door said. Only those who won the bid may come here. What a coincidence, 13 replied with a faint smile on his face. I just happen to be the winning bidder for the chat skunk. I'm here to collect my slave. The other items to be auctioned don't interest me, so I'm calling it quits. The two guards guarding the door exchanged a glance with each other before one of them went inside to look for someone who could confirm if the boy in front of them was indeed the one who won the bidding for the chat skunk. A few minutes later, Dora, the host of the auction, came out of the treasury and looked at 13 with surprise. Are you here for the chat skunk? Dora asked. Just like everyone, she sympathized with the young boy after he was bullied by the masked man earlier. Yes, Miss Dora, 13 replied. That scary man will probably mess with me again, so I don't think I'll be participating in the next items to be auctioned. I see, Dora sighed before nodding her head in understanding. Okay, you can get your monster. Come with me. After confirming that the boy was indeed a winner in the auction, the guards no longer barred his way and allowed him to enter the treasury. 13 scanned the surroundings before his gaze landed on a transparent jar in the middle of the treasury. Found you, 13 thought as he narrowed his gaze. A moment later, he tugged on Dora's clothes, making the latter look at him. Miss Dora, what is that flower over there? 13 asked as he pointed at the 5-leaf clover, which was submerged in some kind of clear liquid, making it glow faintly. That? Dora smiled when she saw where the boy was pointing at. That is the last thing that will be auctioned today. It's a 5-leaf clover. Although it is not as powerful as an elixir that can save a person's life as long as they still have a breath, it is very precious nevertheless. It can cure a serious injury and even regrow that person's arm if it is cut down. Isn't it amazing? Wow! 13 looked at the 5-leaf clover with wonder, making the smile on Dora's smile widen. How innocent, Dora thought before a thought appeared inside her head. Do you want to take a closer look? This might be your last time to see it in your life. Can I? 13 asked with a hint of anxiety on his face. Isn't this something to be auctioned? It is, but you're not going to steal it, are you? Dora replied. You're just going to take a closer look, right? Yes. I am not going to steal it. 13 replied in a heartbeat. At least not yet. He would be stupid to steal the 5-leaf clover inside the auction house. If he really did that, then he would probably not be able to leave the auction house alive. When they were only a meter away from the jar, Dora waved her hand, and the space in front of them shimmered. A moment later, the pretty lady took the jar off the pedestal and showed it to the boy. Take a good look at this, Zion, Dora said. She remembered his name because the boy had introduced himself to Netero when he tried to give the old man the Chad skunk as a gift. The scene had left a lasting impression on Dora, who was very good at remembering things about people. The boy then used his finger to gingerly touch the jar, making the pretty lady giggle. Don't worry, the jar won't bite, Dora stated. Emboldened by her encouragement, Zion then held the jar and took a good look at the 5-leaf clover inside of it. His hand caressed the surface of the jar, making Dora think that the boy was truly mesmerized by what he was seeing. Little did she know that the boy was writing a runic symbol on the jar's surface with his finger. On the way to the treasury, 13 had written a symbol on his finger and activated a Jinn core in his possession to empower the rune magic. The spell was a very simple one, but it was impossible to trace. It was tracking rune magic. No matter where the jar was, 13 would have a general idea of where it was. The only downside was that this tracking magic only lasted for 24 hours. But as long as the jar didn't leave Groner City, 13 would be able to know its exact location. "Thank you, big sister," 13 said. "You're the best." Dora smirked before placing the jar back on the pedestal and once again activated the invisible barrier that protected it. She then guided 13 to where the Chad skunk was and proceeded with the ceremony to transfer the ownership of the Chad skunk to the boy. "From now on, I will call you Giga Chad," 13 said as he petted the head of the 2-meter-tall Chad skunk that was tall enough to be a mount. The Chad skunk gave its master the "You have good taste in names, bruh," before nudging the boy's head with its own. Seeing this exchange, Dora's heart melted. However, she knew that she still had an auction to host, so she asked Zion to leave so that they could finish up their preparation for the final set of items to be auctioned. 13 thanked her once more before leaving the treasury like a good boy. He then made his way towards the stairs to return to Norris' VIP room. Although the skunk was big, the hallways and the stairs of the auction house were spacious enough for it to pass through. Clearly, the place had been built with the intention of selling large monsters in the auction, allowing the staff to take them to the stage without too many problems. When 13 entered the room, Christopher, Norris, and Adira were shocked to see that the boy hadn't come back alone and had even brought the Chad skunk with him. "You said that you are just taking a stroll," Norris said. "I did," 13 replied. "I took a stroll and picked up Giga Chad along the way." Giga Chad? Christopher looked at the Chad skunk, who was also looking back at him as if telling him, "Sup, bro?" "Yes," 13 nodded. "What do you think of his name?" "It's so cool, young master," Christopher replied. 13 smirked because his subordinate got it. Unfortunately, Norris and Adira weren't too enthusiastic about Zion's naming sense. However, since the Chad skunk wasn't theirs, they decided to not say anything and quietly waited for the auction to start. A few minutes later, Dora returned to the stage and greeted everyone. "Thank you for the wait," Dora stated. "The last batch of the items to be auctioned will now begin." Cheers resounded inside the auction house. At the same time, the masked man and 13's gaze met each other. Arthas had a smirk behind his mask as he looked at the young man, who was looking at him with a calm expression on his face. Netero, who was paying attention to the two of them, sighed in his heart. He knew what Arthas planned to do, and he already felt pity for the boy in front of them. However, after seeing the calmness and even a hint of ridicule in Zion's eyes, Netero felt that something had changed in the boy's aura after the short break was over. "Am I just overthinking things?" Netero thought before shaking his head. He only wanted the auction to be over already so he could go home and rest. Soon, Dora's voice spread inside the auction house, marking the start of the final bidding war in the auction house of Groner City. 40,000. 43,000. 51,000. 56,000. 64,000. The current item that was being auctioned was a peak silver-grade greatsword, and all the warriors in the auction house were outbidding each other furiously. 13 simply leaned on the couch and enjoyed the fruit juice that had been handed to him by the servant who had come to give them some refreshments. Although he mentioned earlier that he no longer had any intention of bidding for the remaining items up for auction, he still planned to bid for the 5-leaf clover. "As I thought, the funds I have are not enough," 13 mused. But it no longer matters. Half an hour later, the familiar transparent jar holding the 5-leaf clover arrived on the stage. "Well then, this is the last item that we have for today," Dora said, giving her most radiant smile. "It is none other than the 5-leaf clover." 13 was quite impressed by the young lady's stamina. Although there were breaks in between, the fact remained that the pretty lady was still lively even after so many items were auctioned already. While the boy was observing Dora, the latter raised her hand and continued her explanation. "As you may already know, the 5-leaf clover is a very precious commodity," Dora explained. "It only grows in very few places in the world, and most of them are holy sites where ordinary people are not able to enter. But we don't need to go to that place because we already have a 5-leaf clover here. So, let's not delay the inevitable and start the starting bid." The people cheered as they, too, hyped themselves up for the bidding war that was about to begin. The initial bidding prize of the 5-leaf clover is 0. Dora explained. The minimum bid for this item is 1,000 silver coins. Since this is a priceless commodity, I will let you all decide how much it will cost. Well then, who wished to have the honor of the first bid? Just as soon as Dora asked the question, a firm and loud voice spread inside the auction house. 40,000. 13 shouted. As if waiting for that moment, the masked man also made his bid, shocking everyone inside the auction house. 300,000 silver coins. The voice of the masked man was arrogant, as if challenging everyone to come and outbid him. 400,000. The masked man and 13 both shifted their attention to Adira, who had an amused smile on her face. 500,000, the masked man stated. 600,000. Adira replied as if that much silver coin was just pocket money to her. Norris, who was seated not far from her, pinched the bridge of his nose because his acquaintance was causing trouble. Since they were in the same VIP room, it was fairly easy to assume that he and Adira had some kind of relationship. Because of this, the slave master felt a major headache coming his way, which was not something he was prepared to deal with. 700,000, the masked man growled. Let's make things more exciting, Adira said while using a nail file to trim her nails. 2 million silver coins. 13 and Norris were speechless. Both of them were thinking that the masked man would be the one winning the final item for auction, but the drow suddenly joined the bidding, which made 13 stare at the drow. He was giving Adira the "let the masked man win" gaze, but the drow misinterpreted the message that he was trying to convey to her. You want me to win? Okay, Adira smiled sweetly, showing her pearly white teeth that stood out due to her jet black skin. I'll win this for you. 3 million. The masked man's voice was now chillingly cold as he gazed at the drow, who seemed to not care who she was offending. Peasant, Adira commented after hearing the masked man's bid. 5 million. *T. Arg. 13 and Norris couldn't help but face palm at the same time because the drow was making things difficult for the two of them. You called me a peasant? The masked man growled. You dare. Bid up or shut up, Adira replied. But, as if there was something missing in the word she said earlier, she made sure to add one more word to complete it. Peasant. The moment those words escaped Adira's lips, the masked man released his aura, showing the drow his rank as champion. Adira paused in filing her nails before arching an eyebrow at the masked man, who was trying to intimidate her with his aura. A moment later, a cold and chilling aura spread in the surroundings as Adira, too, made her rank known to everyone. Similar to the masked man, Adira was also a champion, which surprised 13 and Christopher, who was seated near her. She's stronger than the masked man, 13 thought after sensing the pressure that the two people were emanating. Okay, let's all calm down and handle this like the adults that we are. Netero decided to interfere because if the two of them decided to fight inside the auction house, it might destroy it completely. Calm down, Netero said as he patted Arthas' shoulder. Let's not make a scene here, okay? Arthas snorted before sealing his aura. Although he realized that the drow was stronger than him, he wasn't afraid to fight her in battle. Battles between the people of the same rank isn't always decided due to the strength of their aura. Battle experience was also a key in a battle between champions. Adira's icy presence also disappeared as if nothing had happened. She then resumed to filing her nails, and waited for the masked man to outbid her. But, using that brief moment of calm, 13 whispered something in Adira's ears, making the latter's lips curl up. 10 million. Arthas shouted. Adira, who had been asked to back down by 13, only gave Arthas a smile and playful wink. Since you want it that badly, I'll let you have it, Adira said. If I bully a peasant, I will just become the laughing stock of my circle of friends. It is so not worth it. Arthas, who heard Adira's snarky words, almost coughed out blood then and there. He made a bid worth 10 million silver coins and he was still called a peasant by the drow? Even if he won the bidding war, he felt as if the drow still had the last laugh in their exchange. 13 and Norris both pinched the bridge of their nose at the same time because the drow was simply too competitive. Even when she backed down, she made sure that she had the final word, making the 7-year-old and the slave master feel a headache coming their way. 13, Christopher, Norris, and Adira parted ways after the auction ended. Although he felt touched when Adira told him that she bid for the 5-leaf clover in order to avenge him, he would rather the masked man win than have her win. If she won the 5-leaf clover and gave it to 13, he knew that it wouldn't be free, especially when she spent millions of coins for it. Also, it was almost impossible to steal from a drow who could see clearly even in dark places. "Turn left on this street, Giga," 13 said. "After that, turn right." He and Christopher were currently riding on top of the Chad skunk, who was as tall as a horse. But, unlike a horse, it didn't run as fast and preferred to walk in the wild. In fact, it very rarely had the need to run, even if there were predators nearby. Their stink spray was enough to deter predators, especially those with higher ranks than them. Also, their meat wasn't really the most delicious of all the beasts in Solterra, and was in fact just as stinky as their stink spray. In short, there was no merit in killing it for food, so this race of monsters lived relatively peaceful lives in the plains and rainforests of Solterra. When they arrived at the warehouse, the first thing they heard was the sound of hammers hitting on metal. 13 had asked his slaves to produce as many arrows as possible for their next expedition. "It's a shame I didn't get the dark wing bow," 13 thought. "I guess I'll just have to craft one myself." 13 had already bought some clay, which he could use to mold anything he wanted. He also planned to use a mixture of steel, orichalcon, and the powdered horn of a bronze-horned rhino to form the base of the bow. The reason why he intended to use the horn of the bronze rhino was to make the finished product lighter and more flexible, allowing 13 to pull the bowstring to its fullest potential before releasing his arrow. The last thing he needed to find was a strong material to be used to make the bowstring to complete his weapon. The perfect bowstring material to be found in these parts are the hairs from the Warzer Black Hound, 13 thought. The only problem is that it's a rank 3 monster and runs as fast as a horse. It will take a lot of planning to hunt it. With these materials, the end product would be a mid-grade bronze weapon, which was still better than the mass-produced bow in the city. The slaves who were in the warehouse were surprised when they saw the Chad skunk. But, after hearing 13's explanation that it was a slave that he bought in the auction, everyone settled down immediately. After finding a place for the Chad skunk to rest, 13 immediately went to work to craft the mold of his bow. Using the clay as a base, the boy also sprinkled some powdered horn from the bronze rhino on top of it to ensure that the mold wouldn't crack once the melted metals were poured into it. He asked Bruno to knead the clay like a bread dough as he sprinkled more and more powdered horn on it, making it firmer. When he deemed that the powder and the clay were mixed properly, he asked the ogre to use the makeshift rolling pin to flatten it a bit. Once that was done, 13 started to carve the design of his bow. He planned to use the bow as a long-range and close combat weapon that could be detached in the middle to form 2 short swords. Although he couldn't use it for long battles because he didn't have the arm strength to dual-wield for an extended period, a quick and decisive fight was possible. After finishing the mold, he baked it over coals to solidify its body. This process took several minutes before 13 was satisfied with the result. He allowed the molded clay to cool down for a while he had dinner with Christopher. 2 hours later, he returned to the smithy and asked Bruno to smelt some metals for him. The ogre was already used to smelting metals and had become adept in it. Because of this, 13 was more than happy to delegate the work to Bruno, who was starting to enjoy his new hobby. The boy watched as the ogre paid close attention to the metals that were slowly being melted in the forge. He might really have a knack for smithing, 13 thought. If Christopher becomes strong enough to no longer need Bruno's help, I'll ask him to hand the ogre's avatar to my father to serve as his assistant in the smithy. This way, he would still be able to help Christopher by crafting weapons for his other brute monsters, who would continue to follow him in his journeys in Solterra. Half an hour later, when the metals were all melted, Bruno gingerly used the blacksmith tongs to take the melted metal out of the forge. He then poured it slowly into the mold that 13 had made, making sure to cover everything. 13 did the rest as he used a metal spatula to make sure that the metals were properly distributed inside the mold. While 13 was busy doing the things he was doing, Harry, Colbert, and 2 more teenagers finally arrived in Groner City. But they didn't dare to enter it because they were afraid that they were going to be questioned and detained. Suddenly, Harry saw a group of people headed to the city and immediately recognized the young lady that was mounted on top of a black horse. He didn't even bat an eye and immediately ran towards Rihanna, whom he had worked together with in the past. Seeing that someone was running towards their leader, Rihanna's hunting party immediately took a defensive formation with Rufus, Aaron, and Jean at the front with their weapons drawn. "Lower your weapons," Rihanna ordered after recognizing who the boy was. Some of the teenagers recognized Harry and Colbert because the 2 of them had also been captured by the orcs and stayed in the same prison as them. "Rihanna, can you help us enter the city?" Harry asked. "I will owe you a favor if you do." Rihanna frowned, but still nodded her head. "I will help you and your 2 friends, but not him," Rihanna stated as she pointed at Colbert. "Why?" Colbert, who had been singled out, was surprised. "What did I ever do to you?" "You didn't do anything to me," Rihanna replied. "However, you conspired against Zion. This is something that I cannot forgive. If you want to enter the city, you can enter it on your own. I will not help you." "You be asterisks," Colbert shouted. "Do you not know who I am? I am a retainer from a prestigious family." "So?" Rihanna asked back. "So what if you are from one? You don't have power over me. So, good luck in entering the city alone. Also, don't try to join our group when we enter the city, or I will ask my members to cripple you." Without another word, Rihanna urged her horse, Lancelot, to head towards the gate of the city. Jubii, who served as the guardian of Rihanna's hunting party, gave Colbert a sidelong glance before reporting him to Christopher via telepathy. 13 had asked Jubii to immediately report any kind of incident back to Christopher. Naturally, the chubby boy would report these things to his young master, who would decide how to deal with the boy, who had done what he could to get all the teenagers he had saved to turn their backs on him. "Young master, I have something to report," Christopher said after he received Jubii's telepathic message. "Harry and that bastard, Colbert, have met up with Rihanna outside the city." "Oh." 13 arched an eyebrow after hearing Christopher's report. He was half expecting that Harry would make his way to Groner City along with his team, not ruling out the possibility that the teenage boy would focus on strengthening himself and his team in the Houdini Desert. Christopher continued his report. When the chubby boy told him that Rihanna had excluded Colbert from Harry's group, a faint smile appeared on his lips. He didn't say anything and simply listened until Christopher finished his report. When the chubby boy was done, the 7-year-old pondered for a bit before an evil smirk appeared on his face. Christopher, who saw the change in his young master's expression, also smiled evilly. He did not have a good impression of Colbert after he instigated a mutiny in the past, so Christopher was more than happy to see the bastard suffer under his young master's machinations. "Come, Visago," 13 said. A moment later, the dumb-looking bird landed on the table in front of 13 and tilted its head. The younger boy whispered something in the Pocopoco's ears. When he was done, the bird flapped his wings and flew away to complete the task that 13 had asked of him. "Christopher, meet up with Rihanna and Harry in my place," 13 said as he returned to grinding the rough edges of his bow, sending sparks flying as the metal and grinding tool met. "I'll meet with him after I'm done here." "Yes, young master." Christopher bowed respectfully before heading to the entrance of the warehouse to wait for Rihanna's return. Meanwhile, in the slave market, there is a teenage boy named Colbert hanging around the outskirts of Groner City, Visago said using 13's voice. "I intend to buy him for 1,000 silver, so please catch him as soon as possible. I will visit you tomorrow morning to personally deal with him." Visago then lifted its claw and dropped a white coin on the slave master's table, which was equivalent to 1,000 silver coins. "Very well," Norris replied. "Tell your master to pick this Colbert boy tomorrow." The Pocopoco tilted its head as if it didn't understand what the slave master was talking about. "Dumb bird, just tell your master that I agree to his request," Norris said before shooing the bird away. The Poco flew away, but not without hurling insults at the slave master, making the drow, who was also in the office, chuckle. That boy sure knows how to use his slaves, Adira commented. As far as I know, Pocos are very hard to tame. He just bought it recently, yet it seems that he already understands how to make it send messages. This isn't the first time I've seen something like this. Norris shrugged. Then how about the boy named Colbert? Adira asked. Want me to fetch him for you? You will personally go? Norris looked at his acquaintance in surprise. Are you that bored? Yes, Adira answered before standing up. I was planning to make the kid owe me a favor by buying the 5-leaf clover for him, but it seems that he has other plans. Might as well do this task to relieve my boredom a bit. After saying those words, the drow left the slave master's tent to look for Colbert, who was desperately thinking of how he could enter the city without being captured by the barbarians. As a drow and a champion, it would be very easy for her to spot the teenage boy, even if he was a mile away from the city. Norris leaned back on his chair and sighed. The auction had just ended a few hours ago, and he was already dead tired from thinking about the potential backlash of Adira's confrontation with the city lord. Of course, there was a chance that Arthas wouldn't make a move against him, especially since Adira was a champion who might just be stronger than him. Even so, he planned to smooth things over with the city lord tomorrow to prevent any problems from arising in his business. Outside of Groner City, that be *. Colbert gnashed his teeth in anger after remembering Rihanna's disdainful expression when she looked at him. It seems that she had really become that 7-year-old subordinate. If I ever get my hands on him, I'll show him that he is messing with the wrong person. He couldn't believe that, in just a short period of time, Rihanna had managed to become the leader of her own hunting party. But that was not all. The high orc who was following them was a rank 3 monster. He didn't know what happened after Zion, Christopher, and Rihanna arrived in the barbarian city, but a single glance was enough to tell him that the teenage girl was now in a position of power. The teenager had felt the killing intent of the wanderers following Rihanna when they looked at him, which was also why he didn't dare to follow behind their group in order to enter the city. Colbert had no doubts that if he were to really try to sneak inside the city by forcing his way into their hunting party, they wouldn't hesitate to cripple him and leave him behind to become monster food. Left with no choice, he only did what he could do at that time. He demanded that Harry and the 2 other wanderers, who were part of their team, leave all their food and water behind. Harry didn't hesitate to agree to his demand, knowing that as long as he was able to meet up with 13, he knew that he would find food and water. The 2 wanderers were more reluctant, but after Rihanna told them that they didn't have to worry about food and water, they decided to trust her and leave their resources behind as well. If Colbert ate and drank sparingly, he'd have enough food and water to last him a month in the Houdini Desert. Damn it. Colbert pounded the ground with his fist out of anger. He had been thinking for a while now about what his next course of action needed to be, but the more he thought, the more he realized that unless he was able to find a lone rank 1 monster wandering in the desert, his chances of survival were slim. I hate that be *. Colbert growled. I hate that bastard Harry. I hate that pig Christopher. But the one I hate the most is that brat, Zion. If not for him, none of this would have happened. The teenage boy wasn't aware that he was saying these words out loud out of anger. But he no longer cared. He was cold, hungry, and alone, and the only thing he could do was vent out his frustrations. Oh, you know Zion? Tell me more about him. Colbert's body immediately froze when he heard someone speak behind him. His entire body froze as if he was trapped in a block of ice. Even so, he gritted his teeth and slowly turned his head to look behind him. There, he saw a pair of ruby-like eyes and a set of pearly white teeth. A moment later, his eyes rolled in their sockets as he fainted on the spot. Adira chuckled as she looked at the unconscious boy who was lying on the ground, and peed himself. What a disappointment. Adira sighed. The boy you hate so much can look me straight in the eyes as if I were his equal, despite being weaker than me. You, on the other hand, only held my gaze for a few seconds and lost your consciousness. A second sigh escaped Adira's lips as she grabbed the shirt of the boy and dragged him towards the city gate. She was truly curious about Zion, So before the 7-year-old could pick up Cultivation in the slave market the next day, she intended to wring some answers out of the unconscious boy, who would soon suffer a trauma that he would carry for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, inside the city lord's mansion, Arthas was also busy venting out his anger by destroying the training dummies inside his training room one by one. He was very tempted to confront the drow who mocked him, but he couldn't afford to be injured at this point in time. The Tigerkins were starting to stir, and he would soon be called to the front lines to join the fight against them. Because of this, he had no choice but to bottle up the anger he was feeling. Suddenly, he thought of the boy back in the auction, who had looked at him with a calm expression on his face. As much as the 7-year-old tried to look calm on the surface, Arthas had seen the tinge of anger in Zion's gaze. Remembering the boy, whom he bullied earlier, the city lord forced himself to calm down. So that's how it is, Arthas said after taking a few deep breaths. This is what Netero spoke about earlier, huh? I only won a bow, but he won fame. Because of that fame, people sympathized with him. There's no doubt. That drow's reason for bidding against me was to gain that same sympathy. A few minutes later, Arthas finally regained his calm. He then walked towards his room and glanced at the glowing 5-leaf clover inside the jar that was placed on top of his desk. Arthas stared at it for a few more minutes and noticed something on the glass surface. The city lord took a closer look and traced his finger on the spot that didn't feel right. He was a master tracker before he became a city lord, which meant that his duty was to track down monsters, criminals, and other people in order to capture or kill them. Because of this, he was very familiar with tracking skills and abilities. Since his skill set revolved around tracking, it only grew stronger when he became a champion. In short, Arthas was the best tracker in the barbarian race, so he would be able to recognize the marks of those who practiced the same craft. A moment later, a sinister smile appeared on his lips before he took a step back to look at the 5-leaf clover in front of him. It seems that people like to underestimate and look down on me even now, Arthas mused. Very well, let's play a game. Let's see just how good you really are. I can't wait to see you face to face. With that thought, Arthas left the room in order to prepare for the arrival of his guest, who hadn't received any invitations from him. Harry was in disbelief when he arrived in the warehouse 13 rented. He saw that it was big enough to house more than 100 people. Not only that, but the wanderers seemed to be doing well. None of them looked malnourished, and they all looked content with their current circumstances. Granted, the warehouse wasn't a luxurious residence like the residence of the Remington clan, but it was still a safe haven for teenagers like them. The best place for the wanderers who had been forced to go to the world of Solterra regardless of whether they liked it or not. The sound of constant hammering echoed in the background, which made Harry look towards the eastern side of the warehouse where the smithy was, according to Rihanna. But before he could ask if he could see Zion, a familiar chubby boy walked in their direction. "You're back, Rihanna," Christopher greeted. "Was the hunt good?" "Not that good, but not that bad either," Rihanna replied. "Is Zion still working?" "He is," Christopher answered before shifting his attention to Harry. "My young master said that he will meet you tomorrow. He is working on something important right now, so he can't meet you right away." "I see." Harry looked disappointed after hearing that he wouldn't be able to see the 7-year-old, who seemed to be the one who was at the top of the hierarchy among the wanderers. "Rest for now and eat some good food," Christopher stated. "It must have been tough in the desert." "Well then, I'll go back to the young master's side." "See you at dinner, Rihanna." Young master said that he wouldn't be able to join us because he had to go somewhere important. Rihanna nodded in understanding. If Zion said that he would do or go somewhere important, then he meant it. So, she decided to just wait until the morning to talk about a few things, especially about how they would deal with Harry, who was part of a monarch clan. After Christopher left, Harry followed Rihanna to the western side of the warehouse, where she and the other wanderers were staying. "Just so you know, you must not go to the eastern side of the warehouse without permission," Rihanna stated. "Zion bought trolls and ogres as slaves. They will not hesitate to attack anyone who goes to their part of the building." Harry stiffened before nodding his head. He had planned to secretly meet with the younger boy later to have a private talk, but after hearing Rihanna's warning, he decided to just behave and wait until morning came. Zion had made it clear that his side of the warehouse was off limits to everyone, with the exception of Rihanna, whom he considered to be part of his team. The Wanderers, who were under Rihanna's command, respected his privacy because they discovered that the money that Rihanna had used to buy them came from the 7-year-old, whom the young lady held in high esteem. They were not like Colbert, who bit the hand of the person that helped them. However, Rihanna was still the one who decided to buy them, not Zion, so they only listened to her orders. Originally, they thought that the younger boy would boss them around, but he did no such thing. Zion just minded his own business and worked in the smithy alongside his slaves. A few hours later, 13 looked at the black bow in his hand with a satisfied look on his face. It looked crude, but with a little bit of polishing, he was certain that it would look better than the dark wing bow that was sold in the auction a few hours ago. The boy then stored the bow inside his storage ring before he ate dinner alone. There was a reason why he didn't meet with Harry right away. This was his way of subtly making the teenage boy from the Monarch clan know that, here in the warehouse, he was the law. If he wanted to speak with him, he would speak with him. If he wanted him to wait, he would wait. He had already given him a chance to build his own force in the Houdini Desert and even left him half of his resources as well as weapons. But because of certain circumstances, the scion of the Remington house was unable to survive on his own, which led him to come to Groner City with the hopes of being able to reunite with 13. I'll make sure that Uncle Elijah gives me that helicopter when I return to Pangea, 13 mused. I deserve that much for everything I've done for his son. The 7-year-old was adamant about having his own military helicopter, which he planned to modify to become his personal transport. There were places he wanted to go in the Aldebaran continent, and having a helicopter would make his life so much easier. After a late-night dinner, 13 left the warehouse with Tiona and Visego. Their destination? The place where the 5-leaf clover was placed. 13 planned to steal it from the city lord who made things difficult for him earlier. He was confident that if the right conditions were met, he would be able to enter and leave the city lord's residence with the 5-leaf clover in his hands. An hour later, 13 stared at the city lord's residence from on top of a roof. High in the sky, Visego circled the residence and eyed the possible places for entry. He also checked the location of the guards, which he would then report to the 7-year-old waiting for him on the ground. After confirming that he had memorized the layout of the house, Visego returned to where 13 was to give his report. The boy listened to the Pocopoco's words without any interruption. When Visego finished his report, a frown appeared on 13's face. Something smells fishy, 13 thought as he reviewed the position of the guards that were inside the residence. There were several guards stationed in different places, which was very normal for the residences of important people. However, the thing that bothered the boy was that all possible entrances were guarded, with the exception of one. As a system, he knew that something wasn't right because it smelled like a trap. A moment later, a faint smile appeared on 13's face. He then jumped to the next roof and slowly made his way towards the city lord's residence. Visego flew high in the sky and observed the 7-year-old while paying attention to his surroundings. 13 had told the Pocopoco about his hunch and left clear instructions for the bird to follow just in case his guess was right. When 13 was only 200 meters away from the city lord's residence, he stopped. He could feel the hairs at the back of his neck standing on end, and goosebumps washed over his body. I knew it, 13 thought. The boy then made a show of casually stretching his arms before lying down on the roof, placing his hands under his head before looking at the stars in the sky. Tiona coiled herself up on 13's chest and rested her head on the boy's neck. The 7-year-old then closed his eyes, and before long he was sound asleep. The minutes passed, and only the sound of the nightlife of the city could be heard in the surroundings. But somewhere inside the city lord's residence, a man holding a glass of wine in his hand was staring at the boy lying on the rooftop. Arthur's gaze was cold, but he didn't make any moves to approach the boy. The night was still long, and he had no problem waiting. He was expecting someone to sneak inside his residence, and once the rat had taken the bait, he would make sure that it would never see the sun ever again. 13, on the other hand, was not bothered with what was going on inside Arthur's mind. He, too, had dropped some bait, and whether the city lord would take a bite or not, the 7-year-old would still be the one in control of the situation. Visego, who would serve as the observer of this match, landed at a nearby rooftop, allowing him to see everything from his vantage point. What the two didn't know was that there was a third party, aside from Visago, observing this face-off from a distance. I guess taking a casual stroll unexpectedly paid off, the person thought as they made themselves comfortable while observing the city lord's residence, as well as the boy from a distance away. This was a classic game of cat and mouse. Whether the cat would catch its prey or whether the mouse would be able to get away, everything would be known before the morning sun rose in the east. An hour had passed since 13 closed his eyes while lying on top of a rooftop. The city lord's residence was only 200 meters away from where he was, but he didn't dare go any nearer. After spending thousands of years as a system, he had his fair share of infiltrating enemy strongholds, palaces, and holy sites alongside his hosts. 13 couldn't tell whether Arthas had noticed the faint fluctuation of the rune magic he had inscribed on the jar that contained the 5-leaf clover, but the latter had prepared to capture the thief who would try to steal it. But 13 was not an ordinary thief. Since he already knew that a trap had been laid out at his destination, he decided to change his strategy. Instead of being baited into the trap, he would lure the one who set up the trap to come to him. The reason he came close to the city lord's residence was to let the city lord see him. 13 was certain that, as a champion expecting a thief to enter his household, Arthas was paying close attention to his surroundings. Since that was the case, he decided to let the city lord focus his attention on him. The city lord might become suspicious of him, but as long as he didn't enter the residence, Arthas wouldn't be able to accuse him of anything. In short, he was doing this to purposely annoy the city lord. The most frustrating thing for a hunter was seeing their prey dangling right in front of them but not being able to do anything about it. In short, Arthas could stare at 13 for as long as he wanted, but he couldn't harm the boy because he was innocent until proven guilty. "This is payback for bullying me," 13 mused as he continued to pretend that he was resting on top of the rooftop. "I can do this all night." The boy could feel the city lord's gaze boring into his body, but he didn't give a hoot about it. 2 hours later, 13 decided to just literally sleep on the rooftop. The night was cold, but he was already prepared for a long stakeout. Because of this, he took a blanket out of the bag he was carrying and covered his body to keep him nice and warm. Tiona poked her head out of the blanket before once again resting it on 13's neck. She liked being this close to him because it made her feel at ease. As the two were comfortably snuggling to sleep for the night, Arthas' gaze was locked on the 7-year-old's body. He was expecting that a guest would come, but he didn't expect the boy, whom he had bullied at the auction, would make an appearance. Truth be told, he was truly surprised and even doubted his eyes when he first saw Zion. But after confirming that it was indeed the boy that he saw in the auction, he paid extra attention to his movements. "Is he sleeping?" Arthas frowned. "Is he not the one who placed a tracking spell on the 5-leaf clover?" Just like 13 had expected, the city lord started to have doubts after seeing his actions. All the boy needed to do was enter the residence, and Arthas would immediately move to apprehend him. He didn't care if he was really the one who planned to steal the 5-leaf clover or not. Since the boy had entered his property, he had every right to seize him for trespassing. But the boy didn't do that. He only laid down on top of the roof that was a distance away from his residence. There was no way that Arthas could apprehend him without a valid excuse. Even if he was the city lord, his reputation would take a hit. It was also possible that the city lords of the other barbarian cities would catch wind of what had happened, making him the laughingstock of their circle. If this matter escalated and reached the barbarian king's ears, there was a possibility that he would be kicked out of his position for abusing his power. Of course, the barbarian king stripping him of his position was a very far-fetched consequence. However, he was aware that there was never a lack of opportunistic people who wished to gain power. No matter how trivial it was, they could definitely make a big deal out of a minor offense, which would cause him a lot of headaches in the future. Also, Arthas had only been the city lord of Groner City for 10 years after his father's death. There were many people who opposed his inheritance, but the barbarian king silenced them. However, the king also told Arthas that he must be very careful, for one small spark was all it would take for the hearts of people to move and rise up to challenge his rule. Suddenly, he felt a faint fluctuation of power in the distance, making him temporarily avert his gaze away from the sleeping boy. Although it only lasted for a fraction of a second, Arthas was able to sense a power that rivaled his own, making him wary. Whoever that presence belonged to definitely didn't plan to catch his attention whatsoever. Arthas was only able to detect it because he was one of the best trackers of the barbarian race, so he was very sensitive to the presence of others even if they were over 1,000 meters away from him. But before he could start to spread his presence in the direction where he felt the fluctuation, his body stiffened after he sensed a few more presences in the surroundings. Just what is going on here? Arthas' face became solemn because he felt at least 6 champions sneaking near his property. Are they all in the same group? 13, who was sleeping soundly earlier, suddenly woke up when his 6th sense sent alarm bells ringing inside his head. A moment later, something or someone landed beside him, making his body stiffen. Don't move. A familiar voice reached 13's ears. With the moonlight illuminating his surroundings, the boy stared at the drow, Adira, who had crouched down to look at him. This is not a good place to take a nap, Zion, Adira stated. Soon, a battle will break out. If you don't want to get involved in the aftermath, you should just come with me. 13 frowned before glancing at the residents in the distance. He was still too weak to sense the presence of the 6 experts, who had surrounded the city lord's residence. But Adira had detected them right away, so before they could move to harm the boy she had set her sights on, she took the initiative to approach him in order to deter the other people who seemed to be targeting the place that 13 had intended to infiltrate earlier. Let's go, Adira said as she picked up the 7-year-old like a princess. We're getting out of here. The drow then leaped from roof to roof, moving as far away from the residence as possible. 13 threw the city lord's residence one last glance, not knowing what would happen next. But since he was still too weak to participate in a battle of this level, he simply behaved and allowed Adira to take him to the slave market, where she planned to ask him the questions that she didn't have time to ask when they were still in the auction house.